New York City has always had two identities. One belongs to the skyline steel towers catching the morning sun, bridges stretching across restless water, streets alive with noise and ambition. The other lives quietly beneath it all, hidden in back rooms, whispered conversations, and unspoken agreements. This second New York does not announce itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It waits, watches, and calculates. In that world, power is not measured by how loud a man speaks, but by how little he needs to say. In the decades following World War II, the city was rebuilding itself at an astonishing pace. Neighborhoods were changing. Old immigrant communities were finding their footing. Opportunities were everywhere, but so were conflicts. Construction contracts, labor unions, shipping routes, garment businesses, and neighborhood enterprises all collided in a city that never truly slept. Where there is pressure, there is negotiation, and where negotiation exists without clear rules, unofficial systems emerge. This was the environment that shaped a particular kind of figure, someone who did not crave attention, who avoided chaos, and who understood that survival in New York depended on balance. Not balance as an abstract idea, but as a living practice. Too much aggression attracted law enforcement. Too much generosity invited weakness. Too much visibility shortened careers. The men who lasted were not the loudest or the most feared. They were the ones who understood restraint. In the quiet corners of Brooklyn and Manhattan, deals were not written on paper. They were sealed with nods, pauses, and carefully chosen words. Trust was not given easily, and once broken, it rarely returned. This was not a world built on impulse. It was built on memory. Every action was remembered. Every favor counted. Every mistake followed a man longer than his shadow. Thomas Gambino grew up surrounded by this atmosphere, though it was never openly explained. In families like his, children learned early that certain questions were not asked. Adults spoke in fragments, conversations stopped when younger ears entered the room, and respect was enforced without being discussed. The lessons were subtle but constant. Watch more than you speak. Listen carefully. Understand who holds influence without being told. The streets themselves were teachers. Storefronts changed ownership overnight. Businesses flourished or vanished without explanation. Men who seemed untouchable suddenly disappeared from daily life. Others, once invisible, became quietly influential. To an observant mind, patterns emerged. Power moved like a current beneath the surface, unseen but strong enough to pull entire lives in its direction. Unlike the men who sought dominance through intimidation, Thomas Gambino was shaped by patience. He did not rush toward authority. He watched how authority functioned. He noticed that the most successful figures rarely involved themselves directly in conflict. They positioned others, resolved disputes before they escalated, and ensured that stability remained intact. Violence, when it occurred, was not celebrated. It was treated as a failure of communication. This philosophy stood in contrast to the popular image of organized crime. Movies and headlines often focused on gunfire, betrayals, and dramatic arrests, but those moments were symptoms, not the system itself. The system relied on calm decision-making, long-term thinking, and an understanding that chaos invited collapse. Gambino's strength came from recognizing that silence could be more powerful than force. As New York expanded economically, so did competition. Labor unions became battlegrounds for influence. Construction projects offered enormous profits. The ports and warehouses controlled the flow of goods. Every industry had pressure points, and every pressure point required management. Open warfare would have drawn attention and destroyed revenue. Quiet control preserved both. Thomas Gambino operated comfortably in this environment because he never needed to prove himself through spectacle. His reputation grew not from fear, but from reliability. When disagreements arose, he was known as someone who could be trusted to find a solution that did not embarrass anyone involved. In a world driven by pride, that skill was rare. People noticed that when he entered a room, the temperature changed slightly, not because he demanded respect, but because his presence signaled resolution. Problems tended to soften around him. Voices lowered. Conversations became more deliberate. He had no interest in dominating a discussion. He allowed others to speak, to reveal their intentions, and in doing so, he gained the advantage. This approach kept him largely out of headlines. Law enforcement agencies often focused on louder figures, the ones who courted attention and left visible trails. Gambino preferred indirect influence. He understood that true power was not about being seen making decisions, but about shaping the environment in which decisions were made. Time moved differently in his world. While others chased immediate gains, he invested in long-term stability. Relationships mattered more than short-term profit. A peaceful arrangement that lasted 10 years was worth more than a lucrative deal that collapsed after one. This thinking made him valuable, not just to his own circle, but across boundaries where trust was scarce. Yet even restraint carries a cost. Living in constant calculation creates distance from emotion, from spontaneity, from ordinary life. Every interaction becomes measured. Every friendship is weighed. Every opportunity is assessed for risk. The quiet power broker lives with the knowledge that one misstep can unravel decades of careful work. New York itself mirrored this tension. The city thrived on ambition but punished excess. Those who rose too fast often fell just as quickly. Those who stayed too long in the spotlight attracted scrutiny they could not escape. Gambino's method allowed him to move through changing eras without becoming a symbol. He remained part of the structure, not the story told about it. As years passed, younger men entered the scene with different values. Some believed visibility meant strength. Others mistook aggression for leadership. Gambino observed these shifts without comment. He understood that trends come and go, but fundamentals remain. Respect cannot be forced, stability cannot be rushed, and fear, while effective in the short term, corrodes loyalty over time. The streets remembered those who kept things steady. Business owners valued predictability. Workers valued consistency. Even rivals preferred dealing with someone who honored arrangements rather than testing boundaries unnecessarily. In that sense, Gambino's influence extended beyond crime itself. He became a stabilizing presence in an unstable ecosystem, but beneath the calm exterior, pressure never disappeared. Every balance required constant adjustment. Every agreement demanded maintenance. Silence had to be guarded. Trust had to be earned repeatedly. The quiet life was not an easy one. It required discipline, emotional control, and the willingness to let others take credit. This chapter of the story is not about glory. It is about environment, mindset, and the kind of intelligence that thrives away from the spotlight. It is about how power can exist without noise, and how influence often belongs to those who never seek applause. In a city defined by motion, Thomas Gambino represented stillness, not weakness, but control, not absence, but presence felt without being announced. His story begins not with an act of violence or a dramatic turning point, but with observation, patience, and the slow accumulation of trust. And in that quiet beginning lies the foundation of everything that followed. In New York, trust was never given freely. It was built slowly, often invisibly, through consistency rather than promises. The city had learned long ago that words could be cheap, but patterns never lied. Men were judged not by what they claimed, but by how they behaved when pressure arrived. It was within this quiet system of evaluation that Thomas Gambino began to earn recognition, not through force or fear, but through reliability. Every neighborhood had its rhythms. Mornings belonged to shop owners lifting metal gates. Afternoons echoed with deliveries, negotiations, and routine exchanges. Nights carried their own logic meetings, held behind drawn curtains, conversations lowered to careful tones, favors discussed without ever being labeled as such. Gambino understood that these rhythms mattered. Disrupting them caused friction. Respecting them created opportunity. He approached relationships with patience, allowing others to set the pace. In a world where impatience often led to mistakes, this restraint became his advantage. When people tested him, he did not react emotionally. When others attempted to provoke responses, he offered calm neutrality. Over time, this consistency sent a message more powerful than threats ever could. He could be depended upon. Business disputes were inevitable. Money, territory, and influence rarely existed without overlap. What separated functional systems from chaotic ones was not the absence of conflict, but the ability to contain it. Gambino's role increasingly became that of a quiet mediator. He listened carefully, not to agree, but to understand where pride, fear, or ambition were driving decisions. Once motivations were clear, solutions became possible. He avoided humiliation at all costs. In his understanding of human behavior, embarrassment created enemies faster than betrayal. Even when someone was clearly wrong, he found ways to correct course without damaging dignity. This approach preserved relationships and prevented grudges from hardening into long-term problems. People left conversations with him feeling heard, even when compromises were required. Law enforcement pressure was a constant presence in New York. Investigations moved slowly but deliberately, following patterns rather than rumors. Gambino understood this and structured his life accordingly. He kept his routines simple. He avoided unnecessary meetings. He let others speak more than he did. Silence became both a shield and a tool. Those who interacted with him noticed that he never rushed decisions. Urgency, he believed, was often artificial. True necessity revealed itself over time. By waiting, he allowed circumstances to clarify themselves. Mistakes made in haste were far harder to repair than opportunities delayed by caution. The city itself was changing. Economic shifts brought new players and unfamiliar pressures. Old rules were tested by younger individuals who believed speed equaled success. Gambino observed these changes without judgment. He understood that every generation believed it had discovered a new way forward, yet human nature remained consistent. Greed still blinded judgment. Ego still clouded reasoning. Fear still dictated behavior. Rather than resist change, he adapted quietly. He allowed others to take visible roles while maintaining influence behind the scenes. This strategy reduced exposure while preserving control. Visibility, in his view, was a liability disguised as strength. The more a man was seen, the more easily he could be targeted by rivals or by authorities. His reputation grew not through stories told loudly, but through outcomes noticed quietly. Disputes resolved without escalation. Businesses continued operating smoothly. Agreements held. In a city accustomed to instability, this consistency stood out. People began to associate his involvement with predictability, and predictability was valuable, yet this role carried weight. Being a stabilizing figure meant absorbing tension without releasing it. Gambino carried the unspoken frustrations of others, knowing that expressing them would weaken his position. Emotional control became second nature. Personal feelings were set aside in favor of long-term outcomes. This discipline required sacrifice, though it was never discussed openly. He understood that loyalty could not be demanded, it had to be earned repeatedly. Every interaction either strengthened or weakened trust. Small gestures mattered. Remembering details mattered. Following through mattered. These actions created a foundation stronger than intimidation ever could. As his influence expanded, so did expectations. People assumed he could fix problems, smooth conflicts, and prevent chaos. Failure to meet these expectations risked undermining the very stability he worked to maintain. The pressure was constant, but Gambino accepted it as the cost of his position. The city rewarded those who understood its contradictions. New York celebrated ambition, yet punished recklessness. It offered opportunity, yet demanded discretion. Gambino navigated these contradictions with care, positioning himself as a connector rather than a conqueror. He understood that bridges lasted longer than walls. Despite his effectiveness, he remained largely unknown to the public. Headlines favored spectacle, not subtlety. This anonymity protected him. While others became symbols, he remained a function, and functions, unlike symbols, could operate quietly without attracting attention. Over time, his approach influenced others. Some learned from his restraint, recognizing that longevity required more than aggression. Others ignored these lessons, choosing visibility and risk instead. Gambino did not intervene in these choices. He understood that wisdom could not be forced, it had to be discovered. The quiet architecture of power depended on people like him, individuals who valued balance over dominance, resolution over conflict, and patience over impulse. This system was fragile, constantly threatened by greed and ego. Maintaining it required continuous effort and unwavering discipline. In moments of solitude, Gambino understood the paradox of his life. He wielded influence without recognition, carried responsibility without applause, and maintained order in a world that thrived on disorder. This was not a path chosen for glory, but for survival. The city moved forward, unaware of the countless adjustments made behind closed doors to keep it functioning smoothly. Most people would never know how close certain conflicts came to exploding, or how quietly they were diffused. That was the nature of real power. It operated best when unnoticed. This chapter of the story is about foundation and function, about how influence is built not through noise but through discipline, about how stability, once established, becomes invisible, taken for granted until it disappears. And in New York, disappearance was the one thing no one could afford. Power in New York rarely announced itself. It arrived quietly, settled into routines, and shaped outcomes without revealing its hand. The most effective figures understood that visibility was not an advantage but a vulnerability. They operated in spaces where decisions were made before they ever reached the street. It was within these spaces that Thomas Gambino became increasingly essential, not because he demanded authority, but because others trusted his judgment when the stakes were highest. Every system, no matter how disciplined, faced moments of strain. Economic downturns tightened margins. New alliances shifted old arrangements. Ambition created friction where balance once existed. When pressure built, reactions revealed character. Some responded with threats, others with impulsive moves meant to assert dominance. Gambino responded with distance. He stepped back, observed the full shape of the problem, and resisted the urge to act prematurely. This restraint often confused those unfamiliar with his approach. Silence in their minds meant indecision, but silence was his method of gathering information. While others spoke, he listened. While others revealed intentions through words, he studied patterns: who stood to gain, who stood to lose, and who feared change most of all. These details mattered more than any argument presented aloud. Negotiations were rarely straightforward. Pride complicated logic. Fear distorted perception. Gambino navigated these emotional undercurrents with care, never confronting them directly. Instead, he reframed situations so that compromise appeared beneficial rather than humiliating. People accepted outcomes they might otherwise resist because they felt respected in the process. He avoided absolutes. In his view, rigid positions led to broken systems. Flexibility preserved continuity. When conflicts arose between competing interests, he sought outcomes that allowed all parties to claim partial success. This approach reduced resentment and preserved long-term cooperation. It was not generosity, it was strategy. The city itself mirrored these negotiations. New York was a place of constant reinvention, where yesterday's advantage could become today's liability. Industries shifted, demographics changed, and laws evolved. Those who clung too tightly to outdated methods often found themselves exposed. Gambino adapted quietly, adjusting his involvement without drawing attention to the shift. Law enforcement scrutiny intensified over time. Investigators learned from past failures, refining their techniques and expanding their reach. Gambino understood that survival depended on minimizing exposure. He reduced unnecessary interactions, delegated carefully, and avoided creating predictable routines. Randomness became a form of protection. Despite these precautions, tension remained constant. Every phone call carried risk. Every meeting required consideration. Trust had to be evaluated continuously, as circumstances changed people as much as opportunity did. Gambino accepted this tension as part of the landscape. He neither romanticized nor resented it. It was simply the cost of operating within a fragile balance. Those who worked with him noticed that he never reacted emotionally, even when provoked. Anger, he believed, narrowed vision. Calm expanded it. By maintaining composure, he retained control of situations that might otherwise spiral. This emotional discipline became one of his defining traits. His influence extended beyond direct involvement. By shaping expectations and setting standards for behavior, he indirectly guided outcomes. People adjusted their actions based on how they anticipated he would respond. This anticipation reduced the need for intervention. The system regulated itself around his presence. Yet this quiet authority was not absolute. Challenges emerged from unexpected directions. New figures entered the scene without understanding the unspoken rules. Some mistook restraint for weakness. Others believed disruption was the fastest path to recognition. These individuals tested boundaries, often without realizing the consequences. Gambino addressed these disruptions not with force, but with containment. He allowed small failures to teach lessons. He let consequences unfold naturally when intervention would only escalate matters. This patience often corrected behavior more effectively than confrontation. Those who learned adapted. Those who did not eventually removed themselves from relevance. The city rewarded this approach with longevity. While others rose quickly and fell just as fast, Gambino remained constant. His presence became part of the background, like infrastructure noticed only when absent. This invisibility was intentional. It protected both him and the systems he supported. Still, the cost of invisibility was isolation. Relationships remained transactional. Genuine intimacy was rare. Trust, while present, was conditional. Gambino understood that his role required distance. Emotional closeness created vulnerabilities he could not afford. This sacrifice was accepted without complaint, though it shaped every aspect of his life. He measured success not by accumulation but by continuity. A stable arrangement that endured mattered more than personal recognition. In this way, his values differed from those driven by ego. He found satisfaction in order maintained, not dominance displayed. The broader lesson of his approach was simple yet profound. Systems survive through balance, not force. Stability required constant adjustment, empathy without softness, and firmness without cruelty. Gambino embodied these contradictions, navigating them with precision. New York continued to evolve, unaware of the countless quiet decisions that preserved its fragile equilibrium. Most residents would never know how close certain situations came to unraveling, or how quietly they were resolved. This ignorance was a sign of success. When systems functioned properly, they remained invisible. This chapter of the story focuses on discipline and restraint, on the understanding that power exercised sparingly lasts longer than power displayed openly, on the realization that influence is most effective when it shapes behavior indirectly rather than through fear. And in a city built on ambition, the ability to remain calm amid constant pressure was not merely a skill, it was survival. Control in New York was rarely about ownership, it was about access. Knowing who to call, when to wait, and when to remain silent mattered more than any title or visible authority. The city rewarded those who understood leverage rather than force, and it punished those who mistook noise for influence. Within this environment, Thomas Gambino refined a skill few truly mastered: the ability to guide outcomes without appearing to direct them. Every operation, no matter how carefully managed, depended on people, and people were unpredictable. Personal ambition, financial pressure, and fear could shift loyalties overnight. Gambino understood that systems failed not because of structure but because of human behavior. His approach centered on minimizing the impact of emotional decision-making before it turned into irreversible damage. He invested time in understanding motivations, not what people said they wanted, but what they truly needed. Some sought security. Others sought recognition. Many sought escape from uncertainty. By identifying these underlying drivers, Gambino positioned himself to influence decisions indirectly. When people believed they were acting in their own interest, resistance disappeared. This method required patience and discipline. Quick solutions were tempting, especially when tensions rose. But Gambino resisted shortcuts. He understood that rushed decisions often solved immediate problems while creating larger ones later. Instead, he focused on gradual adjustments, small shifts that accumulated into lasting stability. The city's economic engine never stopped. Construction projects reshaped skylines. Supply chains fed neighborhoods. Labor negotiations determined livelihoods. Each sector intersected with another, creating points of friction. Gambino navigated these intersections carefully, ensuring that conflicts remained contained and predictable. Predictability, he believed, was the foundation of control. He avoided centralization. Concentrated power attracted attention and created single points of failure. By distributing influence across trusted individuals, he reduced risk and increased resilience. If one connection weakened, others compensated. This redundancy protected the broader system from collapse. Trust, however, was never blind. Gambino evaluated relationships continuously. Circumstances changed people, and yesterday's ally could become tomorrow's liability. He watched for subtle shifts, changes in tone, altered routines, unexpected urgency. These signals often revealed more than direct confrontation ever could. Law enforcement pressure remained an ever-present reality. Surveillance techniques evolved. Informants emerged from unexpected places. Gambino adapted by maintaining distance from operational details. He understood that insulation was not avoidance, it was survival. By limiting his exposure, he reduced the impact of investigations aimed at disrupting networks. Despite these precautions, risk could never be eliminated entirely. Gambino accepted this truth without illusion. His goal was not invulnerability but sustainability. He focused on reducing volatility, knowing that stability discouraged attention. Chaos attracted scrutiny, order repelled it. Those around him noticed that he rarely issued direct commands. Instead, he framed options, allowing others to choose paths that aligned with his desired outcome. This approach preserved autonomy while guiding behavior. People felt respected, even when decisions were constrained. This subtle leadership style created loyalty rooted in respect rather than fear. Fear produced obedience, but respect produced cooperation. Cooperation endured longer and required less enforcement. Gambino understood that maintaining order through intimidation demanded constant reinforcement, while order built on mutual benefit sustained itself. The emotional toll of this role remained invisible. Carrying responsibility without acknowledgement required internal discipline. Gambino managed stress through routine and detachment. He separated personal identity from professional function, understanding that emotional entanglement clouded judgment. This separation allowed him to operate calmly even under pressure. The city continued to change around him. New economic realities altered priorities. Younger figures entered the landscape with different expectations. Some valued speed over caution. Others believed disruption was innovation. Gambino observed these shifts carefully, adapting where necessary without abandoning fundamentals. He understood that tradition was not about preserving the past unchanged, but about retaining principles that worked. Adaptation did not require abandonment of restraint, discretion, or balance. These principles remained relevant regardless of era. Conflict still arose. No system was immune. When they did, Gambino approached resolution methodically. He identified points of agreement before addressing differences. This strategy lowered defenses and reframed negotiations as collaborative rather than adversarial. Solutions emerged more readily when parties felt invested in the outcome. His influence extended beyond immediate circles. By stabilizing key relationships, he indirectly affected broader dynamics. When central points remained calm, peripheral areas followed. This cascading effect reduced the frequency and intensity of conflict citywide. Yet Gambino never confused influence with control. He understood that overreach invited resistance. By respecting boundaries, he preserved autonomy and avoided unnecessary friction. This restraint reinforced his reputation as a stabilizing force rather than a dominating presence. The paradox of his position was clear. The more effectively he maintained balance, the less visible his efforts became. Success erased evidence of itself. Failures, however rare, stood out sharply. This imbalance required humility and resilience. Gambino accepted both without complaint. The broader lesson embedded in his approach was clear. Sustainable systems prioritize harmony over dominance. They rely on understanding human behavior rather than suppressing it. They value patience over speed, discretion over display. New York thrived on constant motion, yet depended on quiet figures who ensured that motion did not spiral into chaos. Gambino was one of those figures present without spectacle, influential without noise. This chapter reflects the mechanics of quiet control. Not the mythology of power, but its daily practice. Not the dramatic moments that capture attention, but the countless small decisions that prevent collapse. In a city defined by ambition, the ability to maintain balance was the rarest skill of all. In New York, influence rarely announced itself through grand gestures. It was woven into daily life, into the invisible threads connecting neighborhoods, businesses, and families. Those who understood this subtle network could operate quietly and decisively, shaping outcomes without drawing attention. Thomas Gambino exemplified this approach, mastering the art of power that moved like water present, shaping yet almost imperceptible. Every decision in this environment carried weight. Small actions reverberated far beyond their immediate context. A delayed payment, an overlooked favor, or a misinterpreted tone could trigger ripple effects, destabilizing alliances that had taken years to build. Gambino recognized this. He treated every interaction, no matter how minor it seemed, as part of a larger system. Precision was not optional, it was essential. Trust remained the currency of influence. It was earned gradually, measured through consistency rather than words. People observed behavior over time, watching for alignment between promises and actions. Gambino's reputation was built on this principle. When he committed, it was understood that the commitment would be honored, silently but reliably. In a city filled with uncertainty, such dependability became invaluable. Conflict in New York often disguised itself as opportunity. Competing interests converged in neighborhoods, offices, and docks. Ambition created friction. Miscommunication, pride, and fear amplified tension. Gambino's role was rarely to dominate these conflicts directly but to contain them, to guide outcomes toward balance. He studied motivations, understood priorities, and anticipated consequences before any direct action was required. He operated with remarkable patience. Impulse, he understood, was the enemy of stability. While others pursued immediate gains, Gambino waited, observing how circumstances evolved. He allowed situations to reveal themselves before making interventions. Timing, as much as strategy, determined success. Acting too early often solved one problem while creating two more. Acting too late risked losing control entirely. This patience extended to people as well. Loyalty, ambition, and temperament could shift over time. Gambino observed without judgment, noting subtle changes in behavior. Adjustments were made behind the scenes, quiet reminders, carefully framed conversations, or small gestures that restored alignment. This approach preserved relationships while reinforcing discipline. Financial systems, particularly those connected to construction, labor, and transportation, formed the backbone of influence. Gambino understood the levers of power embedded within these systems. By ensuring that agreements functioned predictably, he maintained stability across multiple sectors. Businesses continued to operate efficiently, labor disputes were mitigated, and opportunities for violence were minimized. This invisible oversight reduced chaos while strengthening the network of trust. Yet influence was not limitless. Gambino recognized boundaries, respecting zones where authority belonged to others. Overreach, he knew, invited resistance and scrutiny. The most effective leaders in his world were not those who dominated every aspect, but those who understood when to step forward and when to remain in the background. Balance, more than control, dictated strategy. Law enforcement pressure remained constant but indirect. Investigators tracked patterns, monitored communications, and analyzed transactions. Gambino's method of operating with discretion and delegation minimized exposure. Routine was disrupted deliberately, meetings were staggered, and sensitive matters were handled by intermediaries. This indirect approach reduced risk while preserving influence. Relationships were the lifeblood of this system. Not formal contracts, but personal connections built on observation, respect, and subtle guidance. Gambino invested in these networks continuously. Small gestures, remembering a detail, acknowledging a concern, demonstrating consistency, strengthened bonds that others assumed were permanent. Such bonds were rarely tested publicly, yet they provided resilience when crises emerged. Crisis management required both foresight and adaptability. Unanticipated events, economic downturns, interpersonal conflicts, or regulatory changes demanded flexible solutions. Gambino approached these moments calmly, analyzing available information, weighing outcomes, and allowing events to unfold just enough to reveal necessary adjustments. Interventions were strategic, measured, and rarely visible to outsiders. The city itself was a teacher. Observation revealed recurring patterns of human behavior. Ambition often blinded judgment. Fear shaped decisions more than logic, and pride dictated outcomes more than reason. By understanding these patterns, Gambino could anticipate conflict, prepare responses, and influence resolutions without direct confrontation. This indirect approach extended to negotiations. Rather than issuing directives, he presented options framed to encourage voluntary alignment. People made decisions believing they were acting in their own interest, yet those decisions aligned with broader stability. This subtle guidance preserved autonomy, minimized resentment, and increased cooperation. It was leadership through structure rather than command. Despite his low visibility, the results of his influence were tangible. Businesses continued operating without interruption. Labor disputes remained contained. Violence, when it occurred, was carefully managed and rarely escalated beyond immediate necessity. Stability in this context was more valuable than recognition. It ensured continuity for all involved and minimized risk for the system as a whole. Personal sacrifice was inevitable. The emotional toll of responsibility remained largely private. Gambino carried burdens without external validation. Decisions were measured, consequences analyzed, and personal desire often subordinated to systemic needs. This discipline demanded detachment, focus, and clarity of purpose. Those who lacked these qualities often failed, drawing attention and destabilizing networks. Adaptability was another critical trait. As neighborhoods evolved, industries shifted, and younger figures entered the scene, Gambino adjusted strategies without abandoning fundamental principles. Change was accepted as constant, and rigidity was seen as vulnerability. Principles of patience, observation, discretion, and balance endured, providing continuity even in evolving circumstances. The paradox of his influence was that it often went unnoticed. When successful, interventions blended seamlessly into normal operations. Only failure would draw attention, highlighting what had been maintained quietly for years. This invisibility, however, was a mark of effectiveness, not weakness. Systems that operate smoothly without visible management are the strongest. Ultimately, this chapter illustrates a core lesson. Influence is most powerful when it is exercised quietly, consistently, and strategically. Patience, observation, and discretion create stability that outlasts momentary aggression. Human behavior, while unpredictable, can be guided through subtle intervention rather than force. Leadership is not measured by visibility, but by the durability of outcomes. In a city built on ambition and flux, the ability to remain calm, deliberate, and effective was the rarest and most valuable skill. Influence that endured required neither spectacle nor intimidation, only careful understanding, consistent action, and unwavering discipline. This is the essence of quiet authority. Shaping outcomes without forcing attention, maintaining balance without drawing notice, and ensuring stability in a world defined by constant motion. In the streets of New York, visibility was a double-edged sword. Those who drew attention often gained immediate influence, but at the cost of exposure. True authority, the kind that endured beyond the fickle whims of public perception, moved quietly like a river shaping stone over decades. Thomas Gambino embodied this quiet power, building influence not through intimidation, but through understanding, consistency, and foresight. The city was a constantly shifting ecosystem. Neighborhoods changed as families moved, businesses evolved, and economic pressures forced adaptation. Each transformation created points of tension and potential conflict. Gambino's approach was rooted in observation. He noted how people interacted with their environments, how they responded to stress, and how subtle incentives shaped behavior. These insights allowed him to guide outcomes with precision, often without anyone realizing they had been influenced. Negotiations in his world were more psychological and transactional. He recognized that people rarely acted purely rationally. Fear, pride, ambition, and the desire for security drove decisions more than logic. By understanding these forces, he could craft solutions that satisfied underlying needs rather than simply addressing surface-level demands. This method reduced friction and increased cooperation, creating stability across complex systems. Influence depended on trust, but trust was not static. It had to be earned and maintained continuously. Gambino demonstrated reliability through actions rather than words. Commitments were honored quietly, consistently, and without fanfare. Over time, these patterns of behavior created confidence among those who interacted with him. People came to expect steadiness, and that expectation became a stabilizing factor in its own right. Patience was central to his methodology. Immediate reactions often led to mistakes, while waiting allowed situations to reveal their true contours. Gambino assessed developments over time, allowing patterns to emerge before intervening. This careful approach prevented impulsive actions that might resolve short-term problems but create long-term instability. The economy of New York provided both opportunity and risk. Construction contracts, labor disputes, and small business operations intersected in ways that created points of leverage for those who understood the system. Gambino navigated these intersections thoughtfully, ensuring that agreements functioned predictably. When conflicts arose, he intervened subtly, steering outcomes toward equilibrium rather than confrontation. Delegation was another key to maintaining influence. By empowering trusted intermediaries to manage day-to-day interactions, he reduced personal exposure while ensuring that critical operations remained under his indirect control. This strategy minimized risk, maintained continuity, and reinforced the perception of steady oversight without requiring direct involvement in every transaction. Conflict management was rarely about elimination. It was about containment and guidance. Gambino approached disputes with an eye toward preserving relationships. He understood that humiliation bred resentment and instability. By framing outcomes to maintain dignity while resolving disagreements, he fostered long-term cooperation. People were more willing to adhere to agreements when they felt respected rather than coerced. Law enforcement pressure was a constant backdrop. Gambino minimized risk by insulating himself from operational specifics, structuring activities to reduce traceable patterns, and maintaining discretion in all communications. This approach did not reflect avoidance, but strategic foresight. He recognized that visibility invited scrutiny and acted to preserve the integrity of the systems under his influence. Adaptation was a continuous necessity. New generations of ambitious figures entered the city, often unaware of unspoken rules and historical precedents. Some approached challenges with aggression, others with naivete. Gambino allowed natural consequences to educate without direct confrontation. Those who failed learned from experience, those who adapted integrated into the larger framework. This indirect mentorship strengthened overall stability without exposing him unnecessarily. The psychological element of his leadership was profound. By controlling the flow of information and framing choices, he shaped decisions without overt direction. People perceived autonomy while aligning with his objectives. This subtle manipulation relied on observation, timing, and a deep understanding of human behavior. In practice, it created networks that regulated themselves, requiring minimal intervention. Despite the invisibility of his methods, results were measurable. Agreements endured longer, conflicts remained contained, and operational continuity was maintained across sectors that otherwise might have been prone to disruption. This quiet effectiveness became his signature, though few outside his circle recognized it. The absence of spectacle was not weakness, it was a hallmark of lasting influence. Emotional discipline underpinned every decision. Gambino separated personal feelings from professional responsibility, recognizing that attachment could cloud judgment. Maintaining composure in the face of provocation allowed him to act strategically rather than react impulsively. This self-control became a stabilizing force for those around him, modeling behavior that reinforced order. Observing long-term trends was critical. Economic cycles, demographic shifts, and social changes created evolving challenges. Gambino's focus on principles rather than temporary conditions allowed him to adapt without abandoning foundational strategies. Patience, discretion, consistency, and respect remained constant, guiding all interactions. Interpersonal networks formed the backbone of influence. Relationships were nurtured through attention to detail, reliability, and subtle support. Gambino recognized that small, thoughtful gestures, acknowledging a concern, remembering a preference, or demonstrating consistent behavior strengthened bonds more effectively than overt displays of power. Loyalty emerged naturally from these patterns, creating stability that extended across multiple layers of interaction. Crisis management demanded a delicate balance. When tensions escalated, interventions were designed to reduce pressure without drawing attention. Solutions were framed as opportunities rather than impositions, preserving both dignity and cooperation. By maintaining this balance, he ensured that disruptions were temporary and contained, minimizing long-term repercussions. Gambino's effectiveness stemmed from his understanding of human nature. He knew that pride, fear, and desire often dictated behavior. By addressing underlying motivations rather than surface expressions, he guided outcomes with minimal resistance. His approach demonstrated that influence was not about force or visibility, but about perception, timing, and subtle guidance. Ultimately, his work exemplified the power of patience, observation, and quiet authority. The city thrived not because of dramatic confrontations or public recognition, but because individuals like Gambino maintained continuity behind the scenes. Stability, once established, became the unseen force that allowed daily life to proceed without interruption. In a city defined by ambition, chaos, and constant motion, the ability to guide outcomes without overt control was rare and invaluable. Influence that endured relied on subtlety, consistency, and a profound understanding of human behavior. The lessons embedded in this approach extended beyond any specific circumstance. Patience, observation, and strategic intervention ensured sustainability in a world prone to disruption. This chapter underscores the principle that true power is exercised quietly, consistently, and indirectly. Leadership is most effective when it fosters autonomy, maintains stability, and prevents conflict from escalating. The skill lies not in domination, but in guiding systems to function harmoniously, even under pressure. In the relentless pace of New York, the art of quiet influence proved more enduring than spectacle, more reliable than fear, and more consequential than recognition. Stability, carefully maintained, became the ultimate legacy of an unseen hand shaping outcomes without needing to be acknowledged. The streets of New York often whispered secrets that most people would never hear. Some were carried in hurried conversations at corner stores, others in the quiet exchanges between business partners, and a few in the careful words shared in offices behind closed doors. Influence was rarely declared. It was earned through observation, timing, and understanding of human behavior. Thomas Gambino navigated these undercurrents with precision, turning knowledge into a tool more powerful than overt action. Decisions in this city never existed in isolation. Each choice rippled outward, affecting neighborhoods, industries, and families. A single misstep could ignite conflict, while a carefully timed intervention could prevent chaos before it even surfaced. Gambino learned early that patience was not a passive state, it was an active strategy. He watched, recorded patterns, and allowed events to unfold to their natural conclusions before stepping in. This approach required discipline, foresight, and an understanding that every person had motivations that went beyond what was spoken. Negotiations were subtle dances, choreographed by understanding rather than force. Pride and fear were constant variables in human interactions, often distorting rationality. Gambino's strategy was to observe these tendencies without interference, to identify opportunities where compromise could be framed as mutual benefit. By presenting options that allowed all parties to preserve dignity, he reduced resistance and increased cooperation. Outcomes became predictable not because he coerced them, but because he understood the underlying dynamics. The city's economic framework created countless points of potential tension. Construction projects, shipping operations, labor contracts, and small businesses all intersected in ways that invited dispute. Gambino's role was often that of a quiet arbitrator. He did not command attention, but he guided processes toward stability. When conflicts emerged, he allowed them to play out just enough to reveal motivations and vulnerabilities, then intervened with precision to resolve them before they escalated. Influence in his world was measured by longevity, not spectacle. A stabilizing presence that lasted decades held more value than dominance asserted through aggression. Gambino understood that visible power was temporary, silent influence endured. By operating in the background, he ensured that systems functioned smoothly without inviting scrutiny. People followed patterns of behavior shaped by his interventions without ever realizing who or what guided them. Trust, once earned, was carefully maintained. Every commitment, no matter how minor, contributed to a reputation that others relied upon. Gambino's credibility became a stabilizing factor in itself. When people knew he would honor agreements, they acted with confidence, reducing friction and enhancing predictability. This quiet reliability was more effective than threats or displays of force in maintaining long-term order. Patience extended beyond strategy into human relationships. People's ambitions, fears, and loyalties were fluid. Gambino observed changes without judgment, making subtle adjustments to maintain alignment. Small gestures, a reminder of a promise, a carefully phrased suggestion, a discreet intervention were enough to guide behavior. This indirect mentorship strengthened networks and prevented conflicts from destabilizing entire systems. Law enforcement scrutiny was constant but indirect. Investigators monitored patterns, examined financial records, and tracked communication. Gambino minimized exposure by delegating operational details and insulating himself from routine transactions. By remaining largely invisible, he reduced risk while ensuring that his influence continued unbroken. Survival required understanding that discretion was as important as strategy. Adaptability was essential in a city where nothing remained static. Neighborhoods shifted, industries evolved, and new generations of ambitious individuals entered the landscape. Some sought quick recognition, others relied on aggression to assert authority. Gambino allowed natural consequences to educate these newcomers. Those who failed adjusted, while those who persisted integrated into broader systems. This approach preserved stability without direct confrontation. Conflict management required subtlety. Gambino recognized that confrontation often exacerbated tension rather than resolving it. By framing outcomes as collaborative opportunities rather than imposed solutions, he allowed participants to feel agency while steering results toward balance. Emotional intelligence became as critical as tactical skill. People acted in alignment not because they were forced, but because they perceived the path as mutually beneficial. Delegation and network management were key components of his influence. Trusted intermediaries handled direct interactions, reducing his personal exposure while maintaining control over outcomes. This structure created resilience. If one connection weakened, others absorbed the strain. By distributing authority carefully, he minimized vulnerability and maximized the stability of the system. The psychological element of his leadership cannot be overstated. By controlling the flow of information and framing options, he shaped behavior without direct orders. People believed they were acting independently, yet their choices aligned with the broader stability he sought to maintain. This indirect guidance required careful observation, timing, and deep understanding of individual motivation. The results of this approach were evident in continuity. Businesses remained functional, labor disputes stayed contained, and operations across multiple sectors remained predictable. Stability, when established, became the invisible force supporting daily life. It was a quiet power unrecognized by the public but essential to the city's functioning. Emotional discipline underpinned every decision. Gambino compartmentalized personal feelings, maintaining composure under pressure. Impulse, anger, or frustration were neutralized in favor of rational analysis. This control allowed him to act strategically in volatile circumstances and to serve as a model of steadiness for those around him. Calmness, even in tense situations, became a stabilizing force in itself. Observation extended to long-term trends. Economic cycles, demographic shifts, and evolving social norms created challenges, opportunities. Gambino's focus on enduring principles, patience, discretion, consistency, and respect allowed him to adapt without compromising foundational strategies. Flexibility complemented discipline, providing a framework that could absorb change without losing effectiveness. The city rewarded subtlety. Those who sought recognition often attracted risk and short-lived influence. Those who acted quietly endured. Gambino's ability to maintain balance without drawing attention ensured both his longevity and the persistence of the networks he supported. The paradox of invisible power is that success often leaves no evidence, yet its absence is immediately felt when disrupted. Ultimately, this chapter emphasizes the essence of quiet authority, influence exercised indirectly, strategically, and consistently. Leadership is measured not by immediate results or public recognition, but by the sustainability of outcomes. By understanding human behavior, framing choices carefully, and intervening only when necessary, true authority endures even in complex, unpredictable environments. In a city defined by ambition, competition, and constant flux, the most enduring figures were those who acted without spectacle, guided without overt commands, and maintained balance without public acknowledgement. Stability, carefully preserved, proved more powerful than dominance, more resilient than fear, and more consequential than recognition. This is the legacy of quiet influence, shaping the course of a city from the shadows, while remaining almost invisible to those who benefited most. In a city like New York, chaos was never far from the surface. Economic ambition, social tension, and personal pride intersected in countless ways, producing conflict that could erupt without warning. The streets themselves carried a rhythm of unpredictability, and those who understood it best were the ones who could move within it, without disturbing the balance. Thomas Gambino operated within these currents as a quiet stabilizer, a presence whose influence was felt, even when unnoticed. The power he wielded was not flashy. It did not announce itself through ostentation or intimidation. Instead, it functioned through observation, timing, and subtle intervention. Every interaction became an opportunity to guide outcomes while preserving the illusion of autonomy for those involved. This approach required not only patience, but also deep insight into human nature. People were rarely motivated solely by logic. Pride, fear, and desire often dictated decisions. Gambino observed these tendencies and adjusted his approach accordingly. He understood that influence depended on relationships. Trust was fragile and had to be cultivated continuously. A commitment honored quietly, a promise remembered. A concern acknowledged. These small gestures accumulated into a reputation of reliability that people depended upon. In an environment prone to volatility, such consistency was more powerful than fear or force. It created networks that functioned predictably, reducing friction, preventing minor conflicts from escalating into larger crises. Conflict in New York often emerged where interests overlapped. Construction contracts, labor negotiations, business disputes, and personal rivalries all intersected in ways that created pressure points. Gambino did not seek to dominate these interactions directly. He sought to understand them. By identifying motivations and potential consequences, he positioned himself to guide outcomes indirectly, reducing the likelihood of escalation. He allowed situations to unfold just enough to reveal necessary adjustments, intervening only when the balance was at risk. His approach relied heavily on discretion. Visibility, in his estimation, was dangerous. Those who drew attention often became targets either of law enforcement, rivals, or their own impulsive ambition. By remaining largely unseen, Gambino ensured that his influence could operate without obstruction. Delegation was a key tool. Trusted intermediaries handled direct interactions, allowing him to maintain oversight without exposing himself to unnecessary scrutiny. This created resilience. If one connection faltered, others absorbed the strain. Observation, patience, and strategic silence formed the backbone of his methodology. He rarely reacted to provocation. Anger and impulse, he understood, clouded judgment and increased vulnerability. Calm assessment allowed him to analyze patterns, anticipate consequences, and intervene at the most effective moment. This emotional discipline became both a shield and a tool, enabling him to maintain stability in situations that might otherwise have spiraled out of control. Gambino's interventions were almost always indirect, instead issuing commands. He framed choices in ways that encouraged alignment with broader stability. People felt autonomy, even as their decisions contributed to outcomes he sought to preserve. This subtle form of guidance minimized resistance, maintained relationships, and created a sense of cooperative problem-solving. Influence in this sense was exercised not by authority but by perception and understanding. The city itself was a teacher, patterns repeated over time, revealing recurring behaviors among individuals and institutions. Economic pressures produced predictable reactions. Pride shaped negotiations, fear dictated compliance. By studying these dynamics, Gambino anticipated potential conflicts before they became crises. He intervened not to dominate but to correct course quietly, preventing disruption while preserving dignity for all involved. Patience extended beyond the operational level into human dynamics. People's ambitions, loyalties, and temperaments shifted over time. Gambino monitored these shifts continuously, adjusting strategies to maintain alignment. Small gestures, a carefully phrased suggestion, a subtle correction, or an acknowledgement of effort sufficed to reinforce cooperation. These interactions, though minor on the surface, shape the behavior of networks and preserve stability across entire systems. Crisis management demanded adaptability. Unanticipated events, economic downturns, regulatory changes, or personal disputes required measured responses. Gambino assessed situations calmly, weighing options before acting. Interventions were targeted and precise, designed to resolve tension without creating further instability. By maintaining composure, he ensured that solutions were sustainable and that relationships remained intact. Financial influence was a central aspect of his work. Construction projects, labor agreements, and business operations all contained points of leverage. Gambino understood these levers intimately, using them to maintain stability while minimizing risk. Agreements functioned predictably, disputes were contained, and operations continued smoothly. This invisible oversight reinforced trust in his reliability and reduced the likelihood of volatility across multiple sectors. Despite operating largely behind the scenes, the impact of his actions was measurable. Stability persisted where it might otherwise have faltered. Conflicts remained contained, businesses continued uninterrupted, and networks functioned reliably. Gambino's work demonstrated that quiet influence grounded in understanding human behavior, patience, and discretion could achieve far more than overt displays of power. Emotional discipline remained essential. Gambino separated personal feelings from professional responsibilities, avoiding decisions driven by impulse, anger, or ego. This clarity enabled him to act strategically and maintain composure under pressure. His calm became a stabilizing factor for others, modeling behavior that reinforced order throughout networks under his influence. Long-term perspective guided every action. Economic cycles, demographic shifts, and social changes all introduced challenges. By adhering to principles of patience, consistency, discretion, and respect, Gambino adapted without compromising the integrity of the systems he oversaw. Flexibility complemented discipline. allowing networks to remain resilient even as circumstances evolved. The paradox of his role was that effective influence was often invisible. When intervention succeeded, the systems operated smoothly without acknowledgement. Only when disruption occurred did attention fall upon the absence of such stabilizing forces. This invisibility was the hallmark of effectiveness, quiet authority shaping outcomes without needing recognition. Ultimately, this chapter illustrates a central truth. Enduring influence relies on subtlety, consistency, and understanding of human nature. Leadership is most effective when exercised indirectly, preserving autonomy while guiding behavior toward stability. In a world defined by ambition, competition, and unpredictability, patience and discretion become the greatest tools of control. New York, for all its noise and ambition, depended on unseen figures who maintained balance without spectacle. Gambino's methods exemplified the principle that influence endures not through force, intimidation, or recognition, but through careful observation, strategic guidance, and unwavering discipline. Stability, quietly preserved, became the foundation upon which the city, as daily life continued uninterrupted. In a place defined by movement and change, the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain continuity under constant pressure was rare and invaluable. The lessons of this approach, patience, observation, discretion, and subtle influence, extend beyond the city streets, offering insight into leadership, human behavior, and the enduring power of calm authority. In New York, the art of influence was subtle, operating in the spaces between visibility and action. Most people measured power by confrontation or presence, assuming that authority demanded display. But in the intricate systems of the city, its neighborhoods, businesses, and social networks, the most enduring figures moved quietly, shaping outcomes with a steady hand rather than a loud voice. Thomas Gambino had mastered this art, understanding that control was exercised through observation, timing, and the careful calibration of human behavior. The city itself was an ever-shifting landscape of interdependent forces. Economic fluctuations, demographic changes, and evolving social norms created a web of potential conflict. Any single misstep could cascade through this network, creating instability in ways that were difficult to contain. Gambino's approach relied on anticipating these consequences before they manifested. By understanding the patterns of human behavior and the pressures acting on various systems, he could intervene preemptively, guiding outcomes without overt interference. Negotiation was never a matter of simple give and take. Human motivations were complex and layered. Pride, ambition, fear, and desire often dictated decisions more strongly than logic. Gambino recognized this and adjusted his methods accordingly. He framed options so that all parties could perceive benefit, even if the arrangement primarily served the larger goal of maintaining stability. This allowed agreements to endure, as those involved felt their autonomy was respected rather than overridden. Influence depended on trust, but trust was never static. It had to be cultivated continuously through consistency and reliability. A promise kept quietly, a concern remembered. A subtle acknowledgement of effort, all these small acts reinforced confidence. In an environment where unpredictability was constant, such reliability became a powerful stabilizing force. People aligned their behavior with patterns they trusted, reducing friction and preventing minor disputes from escalating into crisis. The city's economic framework provided countless points of leverage. Construction, transportation, labor agreements, and local businesses all intersected in ways that created potential tension. Gambino navigated these intersections with subtlety, ensuring that relationships remained functional and conflicts remained contained. He allowed situations to evolve just enough to reveal underlying motivations before intervening, avoiding overreaction while maintaining control. Delegation was essential. Gambino relied on a network of trusted intermediaries to handle operational details, reducing his direct exposure while maintaining oversight. This structure created resilience. If one connection faltered, others absorbed the pressure, maintaining continuity. By distributing authority carefully, he minimized vulnerability and reinforced the stability of the systems he influenced. Observation and patience were cornerstones of his strategy. He rarely reacted impulsively, knowing that emotional decisions often exacerbated conflict. Instead, he gathered information, watched patterns emerge, and intervened only when necessary. This restraint allowed him to act at precisely the right moment, ensuring that interventions were effective and minimally disruptive. Crisis management was an exercise in subtlety. When tensions arose, Gambino assessed the landscape calmly, identifying leverage points and potential outcomes. Interventions were measured, designed to restore equilibrium, without escalating disputes. Emotional intelligence was critical, understanding not just the actions but the motivations of those involved. By addressing underlying concerns while preserving dignity, he minimized resistance and strengthened long-term cooperation. Financial influence was another critical component. Points of leverage existed in contracts, cash flow, labor arrangements, and business operations. Gambino understood these levers deeply, using them strategically to stabilize systems without drawing attention to his role. Agreements functioned predictably, disputes remained contained, and operational continuity was maintained across multiple sectors. This invisible oversight reinforced the perception of reliability and preserved trust. Emotional discipline underpinned every action. Gambino separated personal feelings from professional responsibilities, avoiding decisions driven by impulse, anger, or ego. Maintaining composure under pressure allowed him to act strategically and model behavior that reinforced stability. Calmness became a force multiplier, guiding networks of people through uncertainty and tension without provoking escalation. Long-term perspective guided all decisions. Economic cycles, demographic shifts, and social change introduced new variables that could destabilize established patterns. By adhering to principles of patience, consistency, discretion, and respect, Gambino maintained continuity while allowing systems to adapt naturally. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling networks to absorb change without losing coherence. The paradox of quiet influence was that success often went unnoticed. When interventions succeeded, life continued uninterrupted, and the systems he maintained appeared self-sustaining. Only when disruptions occurred did attention fall upon the absence of stabilizing forces. This invisibility was a measure of effectiveness. Influence that endured required no public acknowledgement or display of authority. Relationships were the backbone of this stability. Gambino nurtured them carefully, understanding that loyalty and cooperation were cultivated over time, not demanded in a moment. Small gestures, subtle guidance, and consistent reliability reinforced bonds that held networks together. These connections allowed him to steer outcomes indirectly, reducing the need for direct intervention and minimizing exposure to risk. Adaptability was critical in a city defined by change. Younger figures arrived with ambition and impatience, often unaware of the unspoken rules that governed relationships and influence. Gambino allowed natural consequences to teach lessons. Those who failed adapted or fell away, while those who integrated strengthened the system. By allowing this evolution, he preserved both stability and resilience without drawing attention to himself. The underlying principle of his approach was simple. Influence is most powerful when it is subtle, consistent, and indirect. Leadership is measured not by dominance or spectacle, but by the durability outcomes. By understanding human behavior, framing choices carefully, and intervening with precision, one could maintain order in a world defined by unpredictability and ambition. Ultimately, the lesson of quiet authority is clear. Stability is achieved not through coercion, fear, or recognition, but through careful observation, patience, and disciplined intervention. By shaping decisions indirectly, preserving relationships, and maintaining consistency, one can exert influence that endures even in complex and volatile environments. In the relentless pace of New York, the ability to guide outcomes without overt control, to stabilize without drawing attention, and to preserve continuity in a city prone to chaos was a rare and invaluable skill. The legacy of such influence is not measured in headlines, but in the smooth operation of systems, the containment of conflict, and the enduring trust of those whose lives intersected with it. It is a lesson in leadership, patience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. The rhythm of New York was both relentless and unforgiving. Its energy surged through streets, offices, and neighborhoods with a pulse that few could fully comprehend. Power in such an environment was rarely obtained through noise or aggression. It was measured by the ability to anticipate consequences, to navigate complex networks of relationships, and to maintain stability in a world defined by constant motion. Thomas Gambino understood this principle deeply, shaping outcomes quietly yet effectively, without the need for spectacle or overt control. Influence in this context was exercised through subtle guidance rather than direct command. Every interaction presented an opportunity to shape behavior. A carefully framed conversation, a timely suggestion, or a measured gesture could redirect decisions long before conflicts escalated. Gambino's mastery of this approach relied on observation. He watched how people responded to pressure, how they made decisions under uncertainty, and how personal ambitions intersected with broader circumstances. These insights allowed him to intervene with precision, often before anyone realized intervention was needed. The city's complexity was both a challenge and a tool. Economic activity, labor negotiations, business rivalries, and social tensions all created potential flashpoints. Gambino identified these intersections, observing patterns and anticipating friction. When disruption seemed imminent, he intervened subtly, restoring balance without exposing himself to unnecessary risk. Stability, once established, propagated naturally as networks adjusted to the influence of his guidance. Patience was the foundation of this strategy. Impulsive reactions often solved immediate problems but created far-reaching consequences. Gambino waited, allowing events to unfold and patterns to emerge. Timing, more than action, determined effectiveness. When he acted, it was deliberate, calculated, and minimally intrusive, ensuring maximum impact with minimal exposure. Trust was the currency of influence. People relied on consistency, on reliability that did not require constant proof. Gambino cultivated this trust quietly, honoring commitments, acknowledging concerns, and maintaining discretion. Each action reinforced his reputation, establishing a framework within which others could operate predictably. In a world of uncertainty, this reliability became a stabilizing force in itself. Negotiations in this environment were delicate. Pride, fear, and ambition influenced decisions as much as logic. Gambino framed choices to align personal motivations with broader objectives. By creating arrangements that allowed all parties to maintain dignity, he minimized resistance and increased the likelihood of long-term adherence. Influence was exercised not by coercion but through understanding and strategic guidance. Financial and operational networks were central to his effectiveness. Construction projects, labor agreements, transportation contracts, and business operations all contained points of leverage. Gambino understood these levers intimately, using them to maintain stability while avoiding unnecessary exposure. Agreements functioned predictably, disputes remained contained, and operations across sectors continued smoothly. This invisible oversight reinforced both trust and resilience. Delegation played a critical role. Trusted intermediaries managed day-to-day interactions, reducing direct exposure while ensuring oversight. If one connection weakened, others absorbed the strain, maintaining continuity and minimizing vulnerability. Authority was distributed carefully, preserving stability while enhancing the system's ability to adapt to unforeseen challenges. Observation extended to human behavior. People's priorities, loyalties, and ambitions were fluid, influenced by circumstance, opportunity, and emotion. Gambino monitored these shifts continuously, adjusting interactions and strategies to maintain alignment. Small gestures and acknowledgement of effort, a subtle reminder, a discreet suggestion were sufficient to guide behavior without confrontation. This quiet mentorship reinforced networks while preserving relationships. Crisis management demanded both foresight and restraint. Unanticipated events, economic downturns, regulatory changes, or interpersonal disputes required measured intervention. Gambino assessed potential outcomes calmly, identifying leverage points and anticipating reactions. Interventions were precise, restoring balance without provoking escalation. Emotional intelligence was as vital as strategic insight. Addressing underlying motivations prevented future conflict and strengthened cooperation. Law enforcement scrutiny added another layer of complexity. Surveillance, financial investigations, and informants increased risk. Gambino mitigated this by limiting direct exposure, insulating himself from sensitive operations, and maintaining discretion in all communications. His survival depended on minimizing patterns that could attract attention while ensuring the network functioned smoothly. Adaptation was essential. The city was in constant flux, with new generations bringing ambition, impatience, and different approaches. Some sought recognition through disruption, others relied on aggression. Gambino allowed natural consequences to teach lessons, permitting failures to reveal understanding. Those who adapted strengthened the system, Those who did not eventually exited relevance. This approach preserved stability without overt confrontation. The psychological dimension of his leadership was profound. By framing decisions and guiding perception, he influenced outcomes indirectly. People believed they were acting independently, yet their choices aligned with broader stability. Influence, in this sense, was not authority, it was understanding, timing, and subtle direction. Networks became self-regulating, minimizing the need for direct intervention and reducing exposure to risk. Despite the invisibility of his methods, the results were tangible. Systems remained functional, agreements endured, and conflicts remained contained. Stability, once achieved, propagated throughout the network, creating predictability in a world prone to unpredictability. This quiet effectiveness demonstrated that influence exercised subtly and consistently achieved far more than force or spectacle ever could. Emotional discipline underpinned every action. Gambino separated personal feeling from professional responsibility, maintaining composure under pressure. Impulse, frustration, or anger were neutralized, ensuring decisions were strategic rather than reactive. Calmness became a stabilizing force in itself, influencing others through example as much as through direct intervention. Long-term perspective guided every choice. Economic cycles, demographic shifts, and social change all introduced new variables. By adhering to principles of patience, discretion, consistency, and respect, Gambino maintained continuity while allowing networks to evolve naturally. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling resilience and adaptability without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was evident. Its success often went unnoticed. When systems functioned smoothly, people assumed they operated independently. Only in moments of disruption did the absence of guiding forces become apparent. This invisibility was not weakness, it was a measure of efficacy, demonstrating that influence was most powerful when subtle, consistent, and indirect. Relationships were central to sustained influence. Gambino nurtured them carefully, understanding that loyalty and cooperation were built over time. Small, thoughtful interventions reinforced trust and alignment. These connections allowed outcomes to be guided without overt pressure, minimizing conflict while maximizing system-wide stability. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. True power endures when exercised quietly, strategically, and with understanding of human behavior. Leadership is not measured by dominance or recognition, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain balance in a complex, ever-changing environment. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most enduring of all. In a city defined by ambition, chaos, and constant change, the rarest skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles embodied in this approach, patience, observation, discretion, and subtle influence, offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the quiet power of steady guidance. The pulse of New York City never paused. Its streets moved with a rhythm that was chaotic to the untrained eye, but deeply structured to those who understood the hidden currents of power. Every neighborhood, every business, every individual carried potential for both opportunity and disruption. Navigating this environment required more than boldness. It demanded observation, patience, and the ability to act quietly but decisively. Thomas Gambino embodied this skill, mastering influence not through spectacle or coercion but through subtle guidance, strategic insight, and unwavering discipline. Influence in his world was not about command. It was about shaping decisions indirectly. People acted in ways that aligned with his objectives without realizing they had been influenced. This required an intimate understanding of human behavior. Pride, ambition, fear, and desire were the primary drivers of action, often overpowering reason. Gambino observed these tendencies with careful attention, discerning patterns and anticipating outcomes. His interventions were surgical, targeted precisely to guide behavior, prevent escalation, and maintain stability. Trust was the foundation upon which all influence rested. It could not be demanded or assumed, it had to be earned and preserved continuously. Gambino cultivated trust through consistency. Commitments were honored quietly, concerns were acknowledged, and discretion was maintained at all times. Small gestures, a remembered detail, a subtle acknowledgement, a carefully timed suggestion reinforced reliability. Over time, this created networks of predictable behavior, reducing conflict and fostering cooperation. The city's complexity created constant pressure points. Construction projects intersected with labor agreements, small businesses clashed over contracts, and social tensions flared unpredictably. Gambino's approach was to observe these dynamics without immediate intervention, allowing underlying motivations and potential consequences to surface. By intervening only when necessary and doing so subtly, he ensured that disruptions were contained and stability was preserved. Control, in this context, was about influence rather than visibility. Patience was central to his methodology. Immediate action often solved a minor issue but introduced unintended complications elsewhere. Gambino allowed situations to evolve just enough to reveal the complete picture. Timing more than effort determined effectiveness. Interventions were calculated, targeted, and minimally intrusive, ensuring the desired outcome while preserving relationships and avoiding unnecessary exposure. Negotiation was an art form. Gambino understood that people's decisions were shaped more by emotion than by reason. He framed options to align individual motivations with broader objectives, ensuring that all parties felt their interests were preserved. By addressing underlying psychological factors, he minimized resistance and maximized adherence. Agreements endured not because they were forced, but because they were perceived as mutually beneficial. Financial and operational networks were the framework of stability. Contracts, payments, labor arrangements, and business relationships created points of leverage. Gambino leveraged these points carefully, maintaining predictable operations and reducing potential conflicts. This invisible oversight strengthened trust and ensured that systems continued to function smoothly, even under pressure. Stability was maintained not through domination but through understanding and strategic guidance. Delegation was another critical element of influence. Gambino relied on trusted intermediaries to handle routine interactions, maintaining his distance from operational details while preserving oversight. This structure created resilience. If one relationship faltered, others absorbed the strain. Authority was distributed strategically, minimizing vulnerability while reinforcing stability across networks. This approach ensured that systems could adapt to change without collapse. Observation extended beyond operations to human behavior. Individuals' ambitions, loyalties, and priorities shifted with circumstance. Gambino monitored these changes closely, making subtle adjustments to maintain alignment. Small gestures, a discreet recommendation, a timely acknowledgement, a reminder of mutual interests, were enough to influence decisions without confrontation. Networks became self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention while preserving cohesion. Crisis management required foresight and calm. Unexpected events, economic downturns, regulatory changes, personal disputes demanded measured response. Gambino assessed the landscape, identified leverage points, and anticipated reactions. Interventions were precise, restoring equilibrium without escalating tensions. Emotional intelligence was critical. Addressing underlying motivations prevented future conflict and reinforced cooperation. Law enforcement scrutiny remained a constant challenge. Surveillance, financial investigations, and informants demanded careful risk management. Gambino minimized exposure by insulating himself from sensitive operations and delegating responsibilities. Discretion was not avoidance, it was strategic foresight. By maintaining invisibility, he reduced risk while ensuring systems continued to function effectively. Adaptability was essential in a city of constant flux. New generations brought ambition, impatience, and unfamiliar strategies. Some sought recognition through disruption, others relied on force. Gambino allowed consequences to educate newcomers. Those who adapted became integrated into stable systems, while those who failed gradually fell away. This approach preserved continuity, resilience, and long-term stability. Psychological insight was a cornerstone of his influence. By framing choices carefully, he guided decisions indirectly. Individuals believed they acted autonomously, even as their actions reinforced broader stability. This subtle form of leadership minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and maximized effectiveness. Influence was exercised not through authority but through understanding, perception, and strategic positioning. The effectiveness of this approach was evident in continuity. Systems functioned predictably, conflicts were contained, and networks remained resilient. Stability propagated through interconnected relationships, creating predictable outcomes, even in a complex and volatile environment. Gambino demonstrated that subtle, consistent influence often achieved far more than direct force or public spectacle. Emotional discipline underpinned every decision. Gambino maintained composure under pressure, separating personal feelings from professional responsibilities. Impulse, anger, or frustration had no place in strategic decision-making. Calmness itself became a stabilizing force, influencing others through example as well as through deliberate action. Long-term vision guided every choice. Economic trends, demographic shifts, and social evolution introduced variables that could destabilize networks. By adhering to principles of patience, discretion, consistency, and respect, Gambino maintained continuity while allowing adaptation. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling networks to remain resilient despite changing circumstances. The paradox of quiet influence is that success often leaves no visible trace. When networks function smoothly, people assume operations are self-sustaining. Only when disruption occurs does the absence of guiding forces become apparent. Invisibility in this context is the hallmark of effectiveness. Enduring influence requires subtle, consistent, and indirect application. Relationships were central to maintaining balance. Gambino nurtured these carefully, recognizing that loyalty and cooperation developed gradually. Thoughtful interventions reinforced alignment without overt pressure, allowing networks to function independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became a self-reinforcing stabilizer. Ultimately, the lesson is clear: influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by dominance or recognition, but by the durability outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex, dynamic environments. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most enduring. In a city defined by motion, ambition, and constant flux, the rarest and most valuable skill is the ability to act without spectacle, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability in the face of unpredictability. The principles demonstrated in this approach, patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance, offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. The city never slept. Its rhythm was relentless, a constant flow of activity, ambition, and unpredictability. Every street, building, and neighborhood contained layers of interaction, some obvious and some hidden beneath the surface. Understanding these layers required more than observation. It demanded insight into human behavior, patterns, and motivation. Thomas Gambino had spent decades mastering this subtle art, navigating the complexities of New York with a steady, quiet authority that left an impact far greater than any public display of power. Influence in this environment was rarely about force. It was about shaping outcomes indirectly, guiding decisions, and creating stability without announcing control. Every interaction was an opportunity to adjust behavior, redirect momentum, or prevent conflict. Gambino's success depended on understanding the drivers behind people's actions. Pride, ambition, fear, and personal desire often dictated decisions more than reason or logic. By observing and interpreting these forces, he could anticipate reactions and guide outcomes with minimal intervention. The city itself acted as both a teacher and a testing ground. Economic pressures, social dynamics, and shifting demographics created constant points of tension. Construction projects overlapped with labor agreements, local businesses vied for contracts, and social disputes arose unpredictably. Gambino approached these intersections with patience, watching as underlying motivations revealed themselves. Intervention came only when necessary and was always precise, preserving relationships while restoring balance. Stability in this sense was maintained invisibly but effectively. Patience was central to his methodology. Acting too quickly often resolved immediate problems, but introduced unintended consequences elsewhere. Gambino allowed events to unfold just enough to gather necessary information and to understand potential outcomes. Timing became his most valuable tool. When he acted, it was deliberate, calculated, and minimally intrusive, ensuring that results were lasting while avoiding unnecessary exposure. Trust was cultivated continuously. It was not assumed, it had to be earned through consistency and reliability. Commitments were kept quietly, promises were remembered, and discretion was maintained at all times. Small gestures of remembered preference, a subtle acknowledgement of effort, or a careful suggestion reinforced credibility. Over time, these actions created networks of predictable behavior, reducing conflict and enabling smooth cooperation. In a volatile environment, such trust was more effective than intimidation or force. Negotiation was a delicate art. Gambino understood that human behavior was rarely rational. By framing choices to align personal ambitions with collective objectives, he created solutions that appeared mutually beneficial. Pride was preserved, and fear was minimized. People felt they were making independent decisions, yet their actions reinforced the stability he sought to maintain. Influence, therefore, was exercised not through authority, but through subtle perception and guidance. The operational landscape was equally complex. Financial flows, business arrangements, labor agreements, and social networks all intersected, creating points of leverage. Gambino understood these levers intimately. He maintained balance by ensuring agreements were predictable, disputes remained contained, and daily operations functioned smoothly. This invisible control reinforced confidence and reliability, demonstrating that subtle oversight could achieve more than overt power. Delegation was essential for minimizing risk. Gambino relied on trusted intermediaries to handle direct interactions, allowing him to maintain strategic oversight without exposing himself to scrutiny. This created resilience. If one connection weakened, others compensated, preserving continuity. Authority was distributed thoughtfully, maintaining stability while allowing the system to absorb shocks and adapt to changes without collapsing. Observation extended to human behavior at all levels. People's ambitions, loyalties, and priorities were dynamic, shifting with circumstances. Gambino monitored these shifts carefully, adjusting strategies and interventions to maintain alignment. Small, discrete actions acknowledging effort, offering subtle guidance, or providing reminders of mutual goals were sufficient to influence behavior without confrontation. This quiet mentorship reinforced networks while preserving independence and dignity. Crisis management required foresight and restraint. Unanticipated events, economic disruptions, regulatory changes, or interpersonal conflicts demanded measured responses. Gambino assessed potential outcomes calmly, identifying leverage points and predicting reactions. Interventions were surgical, restoring balance while minimizing escalation. Emotional intelligence was as important as tactical skill. Addressing underlying motivations prevented recurrence of conflict and reinforced cooperative behavior. The constant scrutiny of law enforcement added another layer of complexity. Surveillance investigations and informants increased the risk of exposure. Gambino mitigated this risk by insulating himself from sensitive operations, delegating responsibilities, and maintaining discretion in all communication. Avoiding visibility was not evasion, it was a calculated strategy to preserve long-term influence while ensuring operational continuity. Adaptability was critical in an ever-changing city. New generations arrived with ambition, impatience, and unfamiliar strategies. Some relied on aggression to assert influence, others sought rapid recognition. Gambino allowed natural consequences to educate these newcomers. Those who adapted integrated into the system, while those who failed gradually exited relevance. This approach preserved stability and ensured continuity without unnecessary conflict. Psychological insight was a cornerstone of influence. By framing decisions and guiding perception, Gambino shaped outcomes indirectly. People believed they were acting autonomously, yet their actions aligned with broader objectives. This subtle guidance minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and maximized effectiveness. Networks became largely self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention and maintaining stability even in complex situations. The effectiveness of this approach was evident in the enduring continuity of operations. Systems functioned predictably, disputes were contained, and networks remained resilient. Stability propagated naturally as individuals acted within patterns reinforced by trust, observation, and subtle guidance. Gambino demonstrated that influence exercised quietly and consistently achieved far more than authority imposed openly or force displayed publicly. Emotional discipline was central to every decision. Gambino maintained composure under pressure, separating personal feelings from professional responsibilities. Impulse, Anger or frustration had no place in strategic decision-making. Calmness itself became a stabilizing factor, shaping behavior and influencing networks as much through example as through direct intervention. Long-term perspective guided all actions. Economic cycles, demographic shifts, and social evolution introduced variables that could destabilize even well-functioning systems. By adhering to principles of patience, discretion, consistency, and respect, Gambino maintained continuity while allowing networks to evolve naturally. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling resilience without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was clear. Its effectiveness was often invisible. When systems functioned smoothly, people assumed operations were self-sustaining. Only in moments of disruption did the absence of guidance become apparent. Invisibility was not weakness. It was the mark of enduring authority, demonstrating that influence is most powerful when applied subtly, consistently, and indirectly. Relationships formed the foundation of lasting influence. Gambino nurtured these carefully, recognizing that loyalty and cooperation were built over time. Thoughtful interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to operate independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust became self-reinforcing, creating stability that extended far beyond any single interaction. Ultimately, this chapter illustrates a timeless principle: influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by dominance, recognition, or spectacle, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex environments. Influence that preserves autonomy fosters cooperation and ensures continuity is the most enduring of all. In a city defined by ambition, competition, and constant change, the rarest skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles demonstrated patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance offer lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority that extend far beyond the streets of New York. The city's rhythm was relentless, a constant interplay of ambition, opportunity, and tension that could overwhelm those unprepared to navigate it. Power was not declared by dominance or fear, but by understanding, foresight, and the subtle guidance of human behavior. In this dynamic environment, influence was rarely overt. It manifested quietly, shaping outcomes without drawing attention, stabilizing networks, and ensuring continuity in a system defined by unpredictability. Thomas Gambino mastered this subtle art, relying on observation, discretion, and strategic intervention to maintain balance across the city as multifaceted networks. Understanding human behavior was the cornerstone of his influence. People were driven not only by logic, but by emotion, pride, and self-interest. Decisions were rarely made in isolation. They were shaped by relationships, perceived consequences, and the need for autonomy. Gambino observed these dynamics with precision, noting patterns in how individuals responded to pressure, opportunity, and competition. By identifying underlying motivations, he could anticipate actions and intervene in ways that guided behavior without confrontation. Trust was the currency of stability. It was earned through consistency, reliability, and discretion. Gambino cultivated trust quietly, ensuring that promises were honored, concerns were acknowledged, and sensitive information was protected. Small gestures, remembering details, offering subtle guidance, or providing reassurance reinforced confidence and strengthened relationships. Over time, this trust created networks that acted predictably, reducing friction and preventing disputes from escalating into crisis. The city, as complexity, presented endless points of tension. Economic pressures, labor disputes, business rivalries, and social interactions all intersected, creating potential conflicts. Gambino approached these intersections with patience, allowing events to reveal motivations and vulnerabilities before intervening. Interventions were precise and strategic, designed to restore balance without drawing attention or creating unnecessary risk. In this way, stability was maintained not through dominance but through insight and subtle influence. Patience was essential. Immediate reactions often resolved a problem temporarily and introduced unforeseen consequences elsewhere. Gambino allowed situations to evolve sufficiently to provide clarity, ensuring that any action taken addressed the root of the issue rather than just the symptoms. Timing, more than effort, was critical. Interventions were calculated, minimally intrusive, and highly effective, producing outcomes that endured over time. Negotiation was a nuanced process. Gambino understood that decisions were influenced by more than facts. They were shaped by pride, fear, and desire. By framing choices so that personal interests aligned with collective stability, he minimized resistance and maximized cooperation. Agreements endured not because they were imposed, but because they appeared mutually beneficial. In effect, influence was exercised indirectly, guiding behavior through perception rather than authority. Operational networks were intricate and interconnected. Financial flows, contracts, labor arrangements, and business relationships created multiple points of leverage. Gambino managed these systems carefully, maintaining predictability and minimizing conflict. His influence was often invisible, yet its effects were tangible. Businesses continued to operate smoothly, disputes remained contained, and networks functioned reliably. Stability was achieved through understanding and subtle management rather than coercion or intimidation. Delegation was a key strategy. Trusted intermediaries handled routine interactions, allowing Gambino to maintain strategic oversight while minimizing personal exposure. This structure provided resilience. If one relationship faltered, others absorbed the strain. Authority was distributed thoughtfully, ensuring stability while allowing the system to adapt to challenges without collapse. This careful balance of oversight and delegation maintained continuity across complex networks. Observation extended beyond operational matters to human dynamics. People's ambitions, loyalties, and priorities were constantly evolving. Gambino monitored these shifts closely, adjusting strategies to maintain alignment. Small, discrete interventions, acknowledgments, subtle suggestions, reminders of mutual interests guided behavior without confrontation. This quiet mentorship reinforced the coherence of networks, allowing systems to function independently while remaining influenced by subtle guidance. Crisis management required foresight and calm assessment. Unexpected events, economic shifts, regulatory changes, or interpersonal conflicts demanded measured responses. Gambino analyzed scenarios carefully, identifying leverage points and predicting potential reactions. Interventions were precise, restoring equilibrium while minimizing escalation. Emotional intelligence was as vital as strategic skill. Addressing underlying motivations prevented recurrence of issues and strengthened cooperative behavior. Law enforcement scrutiny was a constant consideration. Investigations, surveillance, and informants required careful risk management. Gambino minimized exposure by insulating himself from sensitive operations, delegating responsibilities, and maintaining discretion. This invisibility was a calculated strategy, preserving influence and maintaining the integrity of networks without attracting undue attention. Safety was achieved not through avoidance, but through foresight and control. Adaptability was critical in a dynamic city. New generations of ambitious individuals arrived with impatience and untested strategies. Some relied on aggression, others sought rapid recognition. Gambino allowed natural consequences to teach lessons. Those who adapted integrated into the system. Those who did not gradually fell away. This approach preserved continuity while maintaining resilience, allowing networks to evolve without destabilization. Psychological insight remained a cornerstone of influence. By framing decisions carefully, Gambino guided outcomes indirectly. Individuals believed they were acting autonomously, yet their choices aligned with broader objectives. This subtle leadership minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and maximized effectiveness. Networks became largely self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention and ensuring long-term stability. The results of this approach were evident in continuity. System operated predictably, disputes remained contained, and network demonstrated resilience in the face of change. Stability propagated naturally, creating environments in which individuals could act confidently while supporting broader equilibrium. Gambino demonstrated that quiet, consistent influence could achieve far more than force or public authority ever could. Emotional discipline underpinned all decision-making. Gambino maintained composure under pressure, separating personal feelings from professional judgment. Impulse, frustration, and anger were neutralized in favor of measured action. Calmness became a stabilizing force, influencing networks as much through example as through direct intervention. Stability was maintained by guiding others toward rational decisions without overt interference. Long-term perspective guided every choice. Economic trends, demographic changes, and social evolution introduced variables that could destabilize networks. By adhering to principles of patience, consistency, discretion, and respect, Gambino preserved continuity while allowing systems to adapt. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling resilience without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was clear. Success was often invisible. When networks operated smoothly, people assumed systems functioned independently. Only when disruptions occurred did the absence of subtle guidance become apparent. This invisibility was a hallmark of effectiveness, demonstrating that influence is most powerful when applied subtly, consistently, and indirectly. Relationships formed the foundation of lasting authority. Gambino nurtured them carefully, recognizing that loyalty and cooperation developed over time. Thoughtful interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to function independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became self-reinforcing, creating stability far beyond any single action. Ultimately, the chapter illustrates a universal truth: influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by recognition or spectacle, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex, dynamic environments. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most lasting and effective form of authority. In a city defined by motion, ambition, and unpredictability, the rarest skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles exemplified in this approach: patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. The city's heartbeat never slowed. New York thrived on movement, ambition, and the constant churn of opportunity and risk. Every street, building, and business was a microcosm, a complex system in which outcomes depended as much on human behavior as on circumstance. In such an environment, power was not measured by visibility or intimidation, but by understanding, influence, and the ability to maintain balance quietly yet effectively. Thomas Gambino had mastered this art, operating with a precision that few could perceive and fewer still could resist. His influence was subtle but pervasive, maintaining order in a city defined by chaos. Observing human behavior was the foundation of his approach. People rarely acted purely rationally. Pride, fear, ambition, and desire often dictated choices more than reason or logic. Gambino studied these forces continuously, discerning patterns and anticipating outcomes. Every interaction became an opportunity to shape behavior indirectly. A conversation, a gesture, or a carefully placed suggestion could redirect decisions before conflict arose. This subtle form of guidance ensured stability while preserving the autonomy of those involved. Trust was the currency that allowed influence to function. Gambino cultivated trust quietly, maintaining consistency and reliability in every interaction. Commitments were honored, concerns were acknowledged, and discretion was unwavering. Small, thoughtful gestures, a remembered preference, a private acknowledgement, or a timely suggestion reinforced confidence and strengthened relationships. Over time, these practices created networks that behaved predictably, reducing conflict and ensuring smoother cooperation across multiple sectors. The city's complexity created constant points of potential friction. Construction projects overlapped with labor agreements, business rivalries produced tension, and social disputes emerged unexpectedly. Gambino's strategy was to observe rather than react immediately, allowing underlying motivations and patterns to become clear. When he did intervene, it was always precise, minimally intrusive, and carefully timed to restore balance without escalating conflict. Stability was maintained not through force, but through insight and strategic influence. Patience was essential to his methodology. Acting too quickly often resolved a minor problem but introduced unintended consequences elsewhere. Gambino allowed situations to unfold just enough to reveal the complete dynamics at play. Timing became his most valuable tool. Interventions were deliberate and calculated to achieve maximum impact with minimal disruption. The results were long-lasting, and the system continued to function smoothly. Negotiation and influence required subtlety. Gambino understood that human decision-making was rarely purely rational. By framing choices so that personal interests aligned with broader stability, he minimized resistance while preserving pride and autonomy. Agreements endured because they appeared mutually beneficial, not because they were imposed. Influence, therefore, was exercised indirectly, guiding perception and encouraging decisions that supported overall equilibrium. financial and operational. Networks formed the backbone of stability. Contracts, business operations, labor arrangements, and financial flows all contain points of leverage. Gambino understood these levers intimately, using them to maintain predictability and reduce friction. Disputes were contained, operations continued without interruption, and networks functioned efficiently. This invisible oversight demonstrated that subtle, strategic influence often achieved more than overt displays of power. Delegation was crucial to reducing risk. Gambino relied on trusted intermediaries to handle routine interactions, allowing him to maintain strategic oversight while minimizing direct exposure. This created resilience. If one relationship faltered, others absorbed the strain, preserving continuity. Authority was distributed thoughtfully, ensuring systems could adapt to challenges without collapsing. This careful balance between oversight and delegation maintained long-term stability across multiple networks. Observation extended beyond operations to the human element. People's ambitions, loyalties, and priorities were constantly shifting. Gambino monitored these changes carefully, adjusting guidance to maintain alignment. Small interventions acknowledging effort, providing subtle advice, or reminding individuals of mutual interest were sufficient to guide decisions without confrontation. This quiet mentorship strengthened networks, ensuring that they remained cohesive even without direct supervision. Crisis management required calm foresight. Unanticipated events, economic fluctuations, regulatory changes, personal disputes demanded measured responses. Gambino assessed potential outcomes, identified leverage points, and predicted reactions with accuracy. Interventions were precise and effective, restoring balance without drawing attention. Emotional intelligence was essential, addressing underlying motivations prevented recurring conflicts and reinforced cooperation across networks. Ever-present scrutiny of law enforcement added complexity. Surveillance, investigations, and informants increased the risk of exposure. Gambino mitigated these risks by maintaining discretion, delegating operational responsibilities, and insulating himself from sensitive interactions. His invisibility was a deliberate strategy, preserving influence and ensuring continuity while minimizing vulnerability. Safety was achieved through foresight, not evasion. Adaptability was critical. New generations brought ambition, impatience, and untested strategies. Some relied on aggression, others sought recognition through disruption. Gambino allowed natural consequences to educate these new cars. Those who adapted integrated into existing systems. Those who failed gradually exited relevance. This approach preserved continuity while maintaining resilience, allowing networks to evolve without destabilization. Psychological insight was central to his success. By framing decisions and influencing perceptions subtly, Gambino guided outcomes without overt control. People believed they were acting independently, yet their actions supported broader stability. This indirect leadership minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and maximized long-term effectiveness. Networks became largely self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention. The impact of this approach was evident in continuity and resilience. Systems functioned predictably, disputes were contained, networks displayed adaptability despite constant change. Stability propagated naturally through consistent, subtle guidance. Gambino demonstrated that quiet, disciplined influence achieved results far more enduring than force, intimidation, or public recognition ever could. Emotional discipline underpinned every action. Gambino separated personal feelings from professional responsibilities, maintaining composure under pressure. Impulse, anger, or frustration had no role in strategic decision-making. Calmness itself became a stabilizing factor, shaping behavior and reinforcing predictability across networks. Long-term perspective guided all decisions. Economic shifts, demographic changes, and social evolution introduced variables that could destabilize even well-managed systems. By adhering to patience, discretion, consistency, and respect, Gambino maintained continuity while allowing networks to adapt. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling resilience without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was clear. Success often went unnoticed. When networks operated smoothly, people assumed systems functioned autonomously. Only when disruption occurred did the absence of guidance become apparent. This invisibility was not weakness, it was the hallmark of effective authority. Enduring influence is subtle, consistent, and indirect. yet it shapes outcomes more reliably than overt power. Relationships formed the foundation of stability. Gambino nurtured these carefully, recognizing that loyalty and cooperation developed gradually. Thoughtful, discreet interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to function independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became self-reinforcing, creating stability that extended far beyond any single interaction. Ultimately, the chapter demonstrates a fundamental truth. Influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by spectacle, recognition, or dominance, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex, dynamic environments. Influence that preserves autonomy fosters cooperation and ensures continuity is the most effective and lasting form of authority. In a city defined by constant motion, ambition, and uncertainty, the rarest and most valuable skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles exemplified here, patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance, offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. The city was alive with constant motion, its energy a relentless tide that tested patience, skill, and insight. New York's streets, businesses, and neighborhoods were not merely physical spaces, they were ecosystems of ambition, tension, and opportunity. Power in such a landscape could not be measured by appearances, force, or public recognition. It existed in the ability to understand systems, anticipate outcomes, and guide events, subtly to maintain balance. Thomas Gambino exemplified this form of authority, exercising influence quietly yet profoundly, shaping outcomes without over-displays or direct confrontation. His was a mastery of the invisible architecture of stability. Observation formed the foundation of all action. Human behavior in particular was a complex landscape to navigate. Decisions were rarely rational. Pride, fear, ambition, and desire often outweighed logic. Gambino honed the ability to interpret these undercurrents, recognizing patterns and predicting reactions. Every interaction, whether a casual conversation, a business negotiation, or a personal gesture, presented an opportunity to guide behavior. Subtle influence ensured outcomes aligned with broader stability while preserving the autonomy of those involved. Trust was central to the exercise of influence. It could not be commanded, it had to be earned and nurtured continuously. Gambino cultivated trust through consistent, discreet action. Commitments were honored, concerns were remembered, and discretion was unwavering. Small, thoughtful gestures of private acknowledgement, a timely suggestion, a remembered preference reinforced confidence and strengthened bonds. Over time, trust created predictable networks of behavior, reducing friction and preventing conflicts from escalating into crisis. The city's complexity generated constant pressure points. Construction projects intersected with labor disputes, business rivalries created tension, and social interactions added unpredictable variables. Gambino's strategy relied on patient observation, allowing underlying motivations to reveal themselves before intervention. When action was necessary, it was precise and targeted, restoring balance while minimizing exposure. Stability was maintained not through domination, but through insight, foresight, and careful orchestration. Patience was indispensable. Quick, impulsive responses often solved immediate problems but created unintended consequences. Gambino allowed situations to develop sufficiently to provide clarity. Timing became the most valuable tool. Interventions were deliberate, minimally intrusive, and strategically executed to achieve lasting results. In a city of unpredictability, this restraint allowed systems to remain resilient and coherent. Negotiation and influence were exercised subtly. Gambino understood that human decisions were rarely guided solely by facts. Pride, ambition, and fear shaped choices. By framing options so that personal motivations aligned with larger objectives, he minimized resistance and preserved dignity. Agreements endured not because they were imposed, but because they appeared mutually beneficial. Influence was indirect yet effective, shaping behavior without overt authority. Financial and operational networks formed the infrastructure of stability. Contracts, business operations, labor arrangements, and financial flows contained points of leverage. Gambino managed these points carefully, ensuring predictability and reducing potential conflicts. Disputes were contained, operations continued smoothly, and networks functioned reliably. This invisible oversight reinforced trust, demonstrating that subtle, strategic guidance could achieve more enduring outcomes than force or intimidation. Delegation was critical to risk management. Gambino relied on trusted intermediaries to handle routine interactions, allowing him to maintain strategic oversight while minimizing exposure. This structure created resilience. If one connection faltered, others absorbed the strain, maintaining continuity. Authority was distributed judiciously, preserving stability while enabling networks to adapt to challenges without collapse. Observation extended to human behavior across all levels. Ambition, loyalty, and priorities were fluid, influenced by circumstances, opportunity, and interpersonal dynamics. Gambino monitored these shifts, adjusting subtle interventions to maintain alignment. Discrete actions acknowledging effort, offering guidance, reminding individuals of mutual interest were sufficient to steer behavior without confrontation. This mentorship strengthened networks, allowing systems to operate independently yet remain coherent. Crisis management required foresight and composure. Unexpected events, economic fluctuations, regulatory changes, personal conflicts demanded careful responses. Gambino assessed potential outcomes, identified leverage points, and predicted reactions with precision. Interventions were targeted, restoring equilibrium without escalation. Emotional intelligence was essential. Addressing underlying motivations prevented recurrence of conflict and reinforced cooperative behavior. The ever-present scrutiny of law enforcement required additional strategy. Investigation, surveillance, and informants created constant pressure. Gambino reduced exposure by maintaining discretion, delegating operational responsibilities, and insulating himself from sensitive interactions. His invisibility was intentional, preserving influence while ensuring systems continued functioning without attracting attention. Safety and effectiveness were achieved through foresight, planning, and control. Adaptability was crucial in a city defined by change. New generations brought ambition, impatience, and unfamiliar approaches. Some relied on aggression, others sought recognition through disruption. Gambino allowed natural consequences to educate these individuals. Those who adapted were integrated into existing systems, while those who failed gradually exited relevance. This approach preserved stability while allowing evolution, ensuring networks could thrive despite constant fluctuation. Psychological insight remained a cornerstone of influence by shaping perception and framing choices subtly. Gambino guided outcomes without overt authority. People believed they were acting independently, yet their actions reinforced broader stability. This indirect guidance minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and ensured long-term effectiveness. Networks became largely self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention. The results of this approach were evident in continuity and resilience. Systems operated predictably, conflicts were contained, and networks adapted successfully to change. Stability propagated naturally, demonstrating the power of subtle, consistent influence. Gambino's methods proved that quiet, disciplined leadership could achieve outcomes far more durable than force, intimidation, or public authority ever could. Emotional discipline underpinned every decision. Gambino separated personal feelings from professional judgment, maintaining composure even under intense pressure. Impulse, anger, and frustration were neutralized, ensuring strategic action guided outcomes. Calmness itself became a stabilizing factor, influencing networks as much through example as through direct intervention. Long-term perspective guided all actions. Economic cycles, demographic shifts, and social evolution introduced variables that could destabilize even well-functioning systems. By adhering to principles of patience, consistency, discretion, and respect, Gambino preserved continuity while allowing networks to adapt naturally. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling resilience without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was unmistakable. Success was often invisible. When networks operated smoothly, people assumed systems functioned autonomously. Only in moments of disruption did the absence of subtle guidance become apparent. This invisibility was a hallmark of effectiveness, demonstrating that influence is most powerful when applied subtly, consistently, and indirectly. Relationships formed the backbone of enduring authority. Gambino nurtured them carefully, understanding that loyalty and cooperation were developed over time. Thoughtful interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to operate independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became self-reinforcing, creating stability far beyond any single action or decision. Ultimately, this chapter illustrates a fundamental truth: influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by spectacle, recognition, or domination, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex environments. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most effective and lasting form of authority. In a city defined by constant motion, ambition, and unpredictability, the rarest skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles exemplified patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. New York City operated like a living organism, each neighborhood, street, and business a vital organ contributing to the city's relentless rhythm. Within this complexity, power was rarely visible, and influence often went unnoticed by those not attuned to the subtle currents of human behavior. In this environment, most effective leaders were those who could maintain equilibrium quietly, anticipate reactions, and guide outcomes without confrontation. Thomas Gambino embodied this rare skill, operating as a silent architect of stability in a world defined by chaos. Observation was the cornerstone of his approach. People were not rational actors. Pride, ambition, fear, and desire often dictated choices more than logic. Gambino watched carefully, identifying patterns in behavior and anticipating responses before crisis could arise. Every conversation, gesture, and interaction was a potential lever, a subtle opportunity to influence outcomes. Through this meticulous attention, he exercised control indirectly, shaping decisions without drawing attention to his presence. Trust formed the foundation of lasting influence. Gambino cultivated it through consistent, discreet actions. Commitments were honored, concerns acknowledged, and confidential matters protected. Small gestures of private acknowledgement of effort, a timely suggestion, or a remembered detail reinforced confidence and strengthened relationships. Over time, these practices created networks of predictable behavior, reducing friction and allowing cooperative systems to function efficiently. In a city prone to volatility, trust became the most powerful stabilizing force. The complexity of New York created countless potential points of tension. Construction projects intersected with labor disputes, local businesses competed for contracts, and social interactions introduced unpredictability. Gambino allowed these dynamics to evolve naturally, observing until underlying motivations and patterns emerged. When intervention was required, it was precise, carefully timed, and minimally intrusive, restoring balance without escalating conflict. Stability was maintained not through force, but through foresight, insight, and subtle influence. Patience was essential. Immediate responses often solved short-term problems, but created longer-term complications. Gambino allowed situations to develop sufficiently to reveal the complete picture, ensuring that actions addressed the root causes rather than superficial symptoms. Timing was the key to effectiveness. Interventions were deliberate, strategically targeted, and minimally visible, producing results that endured and allowing networks to remain resilient. Negotiation was a quiet art. Gambino understood that decisions were influenced by emotion as much as by logic. By framing choices so that individual ambitions aligned with collective stability, he minimized resistance and preserved dignity. Agreements endured because they appeared mutually beneficial, not because they were imposed. Influence was exercised indirectly, guiding perception and encouraging decisions that supported broader equilibrium. Operational and financial networks were the infrastructure of influence. Contracts, labor arrangements, business operations, and financial flows created multiple points of leverage. Gambino managed these levers carefully, ensuring predictability and reducing potential conflicts. Disputes were contained, operations continued without disruption, and networks functioned efficiently. This invisible oversight demonstrated that subtle, consistent guidance could achieve outcomes far more durable than force, intimidation, or public authority. Delegation played a crucial role. Gambino relied on trusted intermediaries to manage routine interactions, allowing him to maintain strategic oversight while minimizing exposure. This structure created resilience. If one connection faltered, others absorbed the strain, maintaining continuity. Authority was distributed thoughtfully, preserving stability while allowing networks to adapt to challenges without collapsing. Observation extended to human behavior at every level. Ambition, loyalty, and priorities were fluid, influenced by circumstances, opportunity, and interpersonal dynamics. Gambino monitored these shifts, adjusting guidance to maintain alignment. Discreet interventions acknowledging effort, offering subtle advice, or reminding individuals of shared objectives were sufficient to steer behavior without confrontation. This mentorship strengthened networks, ensuring that systems remained cohesive even without direct supervision. Crisis management demanded foresight and calm assessment. Unanticipated events, economic fluctuations, regulatory changes, interpersonal conflicts required measured responses. Gambino evaluated potential outcomes, identified leverage points, and predicted reactions with precision. Interventions were targeted and efficient, restoring equilibrium without drawing attention. Emotional intelligence was critical. Addressing underlying motivations prevented recurring issues and reinforced cooperative behavior. Law enforcement scrutiny added another layer of complexity. Surveillance, investigations, and informants increased the risk of exposure. Gambino mitigated these risks through discretion, delegation, and strategic distancing from sensitive operations. His invisibility was deliberate, preserving influence and ensuring the continuity of networks without attracting attention. Safety was achieved through foresight and meticulous planning rather than avoidance. Adaptability was vital. New generations brought ambition, impatience, and unfamiliar approaches. Some relied on aggression to assert influence, others sought recognition through disruption. Gambino allowed natural consequences to educate these newcomers. Those who adapted integrated successfully into the system, those who did not gradually fell away. This approach preserved continuity, allowing networks to evolve organically while maintaining overall stability. Psychological insight remained a cornerstone of influence. By shaping perception and framing choices subtly, Gambino guided outcomes without overt authority. People believed they were acting independently, yet their actions supported larger objectives. This indirect leadership minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and ensured long-term effectiveness. Networks became self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention. The effects of this approach were tangible in continuity and resilience. Systems operated predictably, conflicts were contained, and networks demonstrated adaptability despite constant change. Stability propagated naturally through consistent, subtle guidance. Gambino's methods illustrated that quiet, disciplined leadership could produce results far more durable than force, intimidation, or public displays of power. Emotional discipline was essential. Gambino maintained composure under pressure, separating personal feelings from professional judgment. Impulse, frustration, and anger had no role in strategic decision-making. Calmness became a stabilizing force, influencing networks as much through example as through direct action. Long-term perspective guided every decision. Economic trends, demographic shifts, and social evolution introduced variables that could destabilize even well-managed systems. By adhering to patience, discretion, consistency, and respect, Gambino preserved continuity while allowing networks to adapt. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling resilience without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was clear. Success was often invisible. When networks functioned smoothly, people assumed systems operated autonomously. Only in moments of disruption did the absence of subtle guidance become apparent. This invisibility was not weakness, it was a mark of effective leadership. Influence is most powerful when applied subtly, consistently, and indirectly. Relationships formed the backbone of enduring authority. Gambino nurtured them carefully, recognizing that loyalty and cooperation develop over time. Thoughtful, discrete interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to function independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became self-reinforcing, creating stability far beyond any single interaction. Ultimately, this chapter demonstrates a timeless principle. Influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by spectacle, recognition, or domination, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex environments. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most effective and lasting form of authority. In a city defined by constant motion, ambition, and unpredictability, The rarest skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles demonstrated patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. The city never stopped moving. Its pulse was relentless, an endless interplay of commerce, ambition, and human desire, each factor capable of generating opportunity or chaos. Power in such an environment rarely came from force or spectacle. It came from understanding systems, guiding human behavior subtly, and maintaining balance quietly but consistently. Thomas Gambino navigated this complex landscape with a precision that few could comprehend, shaping outcomes without appearing to do so, influencing decisions through perception, timing, and insight. Observation was the cornerstone of his strategy. People's choices were rarely purely rational. Pride, fear, ambition, and desire shaped actions as much as logic did. By watching patterns, listening to nuances, and understanding motivations, Gambino could anticipate behavior before it became a problem. Each conversation, every gesture, and each interaction held potential leverage. Subtle interventions, sometimes a suggestion, a private acknowledgement, or a carefully worded comment redirected behavior without confrontation, maintaining stability while preserving autonomy. Trust was his currency. Gambino understood that it could not be demanded but only earned through consistent action and discretion. Commitments were honored quietly, concerns were noted, and confidential matters were guarded with precision. Small gestures reinforced reliability, a remembered preference, a well-timed suggestion, an acknowledgement of effort. Over time, these acts created networks of predictable behavior, reducing friction and enabling cooperative systems to function efficiently. In a city of unpredictability, trust became a stabilizing force more powerful than force or intimidation. The city's complexity presented endless points of tension. Construction projects intersected with labor disputes, small businesses competed for contracts, and social conflicts arose unexpectedly. Gambino allowed these dynamics to play out until underlying motivations became clear. When he intervened, it was deliberate, surgical, and minimally disruptive, restoring equilibrium without drawing attention. Stability was maintained not through dominance but through strategic foresight and subtle influence. Patience was essential to his approach. Quick reactions might resolve immediate problems but often created longer-term complications. Gambino waited until situations revealed the full scope of their consequences, ensuring that interventions addressed root causes rather than temporary symptoms. Timing was crucial. Interventions were deliberate and calculated, producing durable results and allowing networks to remain coherent and resilient. Negotiation was an art of perception. Gambino understood that decisions were driven by emotion as much as by reason. By framing options so that personal motivations aligned with broader objectives, he minimized resistance and preserved dignity. Agreements endured because they appeared mutually advantageous, not because they were imposed. Influence, therefore, functioned indirectly, guiding choices and shaping outcomes while maintaining autonomy. Operational and financial networks were the framework of his influence. Business arrangements, contracts, labor systems, and financial flows created multiple points of leverage. Gambino managed these carefully, ensuring predictability and minimizing conflict. Disputes were contained, operations continued uninterrupted, and networks functioned smoothly. His invisible oversight demonstrated that quiet, consistent guidance often achieved far more than force or public displays of authority. Delegation was crucial to maintaining control while minimizing exposure. Gambino relied on trusted intermediaries to manage day-to-day interactions, allowing him to focus on strategic oversight. This created resilience. If one connection weakened, others absorbed the strain, preserving continuity. Authority was distributed thoughtfully, ensuring that system could adapt to challenges without collapsing while remaining aligned with long-term objectives. Observation extended beyond operations to human behavior itself. Ambitions, loyalties, and priorities were in constant flux, shaped by circumstance and interpersonal dynamics. Gambino monitored these shifts continuously, making subtle adjustments to maintain alignment. Discrete interventions acknowledging effort, providing guidance, or reminding individuals of shared goals sufficed to influence outcomes without confrontation. Networks became self-reinforcing, cohesive, and resilient under subtle guidance. Crisis management required foresight and measured judgment. Unanticipated events, economic shifts, regulatory changes, or interpersonal disputes demanded calm assessment. Gambino evaluated scenarios carefully, identifying leverage points and predicting potential responses. Interventions were targeted, restoring balance without escalating conflict. Emotional intelligence was essential. Addressing underlying motivations prevented recurrence and reinforced cooperation. Law enforcement scrutiny was a constant variable. Surveillance, investigations, and informants added layers of risk. Gambino mitigated exposure by maintaining discretion, insulating himself from sensitive operations, and delegating responsibilities. His invisibility was not evasion, it was a calculated strategy, preserving influence while ensuring operational continuity. Safety and effectiveness were achieved through foresight and control rather than avoidance. Adaptability was critical in a city defined by change. New generations arrived with ambition, impatience, and unfamiliar approaches. Some relied on aggression, others sought recognition through disruption. Gambino allowed consequences to teach lessons. Those who adapted successfully integrated into the network. Those who failed gradually exited relevance. This method preserved stability while enabling systems to evolve naturally, maintaining resilience. Even amid upheaval, psychological insight underpinned every action. By shaping perception and framing decisions subtly, Gambino guided outcomes without overt authority. People believed they acted independently, yet their actions aligned with broader stability. This indirect leadership minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and ensured long-term effectiveness. Networks became largely self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention and allowing stability to propagate naturally. The results were evident in continuity and resilience. Systems functioned predictably, disputes were contained, and networks adapted to changing circumstances. Stability propagated across interconnected relationships, demonstrating that subtle, disciplined guidance produced outcomes far more durable than force or intimidation. Gambino's influence operated invisibly, yet its effects were profound and enduring. Emotional discipline was critical. Gambino maintained composure under pressure, separating personal feelings from professional judgment. Impulse, frustration, and anger had no place in strategic decision-making. Calmness itself became a stabilizing force, influencing behavior through example as much as through direct intervention. Long-term vision guided every decision. Economic trends, demographic shifts, and social evolution introduced variables capable of destabilizing even well-functioning systems. By adhering to patience, discretion, consistency, and respect, Gambino preserved continuity while allowing networks to evolve. Flexibility complemented discipline, ensuring resilience without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was unmistakable, its success often went unnoticed. When networks operated smoothly, outsiders assumed systems were self-sustaining. Only during disruption did the absence of subtle guidance become apparent. This invisibility was not weakness, it was the hallmark of effective leadership. Enduring influence is applied subtly, consistently, and indirectly, shaping outcomes far more reliably than overt power. Relationships form the foundation of lasting authority. Gambino nurtured these carefully, understanding that loyalty and cooperation develop over time. Thoughtful interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to function independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became self-reinforcing, creating stability far beyond any single action or decision. Ultimately, this chapter demonstrates a timeless principle. Influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by spectacle, recognition, or domination, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex, dynamic environments. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most effective and lasting form of authority. In a city defined by relentless motion, ambition, and unpredictability, the rarest skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles demonstrated patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. The city's energy never diminished. Every day brought movement, ambition, and unexpected variables, demanding constant attention and insight. In such an environment, visible power could only achieve so much. True influence came from understanding systems, anticipating human behavior, and guiding outcomes quietly yet effectively. Thomas Gambino exemplified this rare form of authority, exercising control indirectly while maintaining the perception of autonomy among those around him. His approach was strategic, subtle, and designed to produce results that endured far longer than any visible display of force. Observation was the first and most essential tool. People rarely acted purely logically. Pride, fear, ambition, and personal desire often outweighed rationality, shaping choices in ways that could either stabilize or disrupt networks. Gambino had an exceptional ability to read these signals, identify patterns, and anticipate outcomes. Every conversation, gesture, or minor interaction presented an opportunity to influence events subtly. Through careful listening, patient assessment, and minimal intervention, he redirected behaviors, maintaining balance while preserving individual autonomy. Trust was the foundation of lasting influence. Gambino understood that trust could never be demanded. It had to be earned and consistently reinforced. He honored commitments, protected confidences, and acknowledged the concerns of those around him. Small, thoughtful gestures of remembered detail, a timely recommendation, or a private acknowledgement of effort strengthened relationships and built credibility. Over time, trust created a network of predictable behavior, reducing friction and allowing systems to operate efficiently even under pressure. The city's complexity created numerous potential points of tension. Construction projects intersected with labor disputes, businesses competed for contracts, and social interactions added unpredictable variables. Gambino approached these challenges with patient observation, waiting until underlying motivations and patterns revealed themselves before acting. When intervention became necessary, it was deliberate, precise, and minimally disruptive, restoring balance without escalation. Stability was maintained not through domination, but through foresight, strategic insight, and careful influence. Patience was central to his approach. Acting too quickly could resolve an immediate issue but create larger, unintended consequences elsewhere. Gambino allowed situations to develop just enough to reveal their full implications, ensuring that his actions addressed root causes rather than superficial symptoms. Timing was the key to effectiveness, and his interventions were deliberate, minimally visible, and strategically designed to achieve lasting results. Negotiation and influence relied on perception and understanding. Gambino knew that decisions were influenced by more than logic. They were driven by pride, fear, and desire. By framing choices in ways that aligned individual ambitions with collective objectives, he minimized resistance and preserved dignity. Agreements endured because they appeared mutually beneficial, not because they were imposed. Influence was indirect yet powerful, guiding behavior without overt authority. And operational and financial networks formed the backbone of his influence. Contracts, labor systems, business arrangements, and financial flows provided multiple points of leverage. Gambino managed these levers meticulously, ensuring predictability and reducing friction. Disputes were contained, operations continued without interruption, and networks functioned efficiently. His invisible oversight demonstrated that subtle, disciplined guidance could achieve outcomes far more durable than public displays of power or coercion. Delegation was an essential component of strategy. Gambino relied on trusted intermediaries to manage daily interactions, allowing him to maintain strategic oversight while minimizing exposure. This structure created resilience. If one relationship faltered, others absorbed the strain, maintaining continuity. Authority was distributed judiciously, preserving stability while enabling systems to adapt to challenges without collapsing. Observation extended beyond operational matters to human behavior itself. Ambitions, loyalties, and priorities were fluid and influenced by circumstance and interpersonal dynamics. Gambino continuously monitored these shifts, adjusting guidance to maintain alignment. Discrete interventions, acknowledging effort, offering advice, or reminding individuals of shared goals were sufficient to influence behavior without confrontation. Networks became self-reinforcing and resilient under subtle guidance. Crisis management required foresight, calm assessment, and precision. Unanticipated events, economic fluctuations, regulatory changes, or interpersonal conflicts demanded measured responses. Gambino evaluated potential outcomes, identified leverage points, and predicted reactions. Interventions were targeted, restoring equilibrium without escalation. Emotional intelligence was crucial, addressing underlying motivations prevented recurring issues and reinforced cooperative behavior. Law enforcement scrutiny was a constant factor. Investigations, surveillance, and informants increased risk and required careful management. Gambino mitigated exposure by maintaining discretion, insulating himself from sensitive operations, and delegating responsibilities. His invisibility was not avoidance. It was a deliberate strategy, preserving influence while ensuring continuity. Safety was achieved through foresight, planning, and careful execution rather than reactionary measures. Adaptability was key in a city of constant change. New generations arrived with ambition, impatience, and unfamiliar strategies. Some relied on aggression to assert influence, others sought recognition through disruption. Gambino allowed consequences to teach lessons. Those who adapted integrated successfully. Those who failed gradually exited relevance. This approach preserved continuity while enabling systems to evolve naturally, ensuring resilience in the face of uncertainty. Psychological insight was central to effectiveness. By shaping perception and framing choices subtly, Gambino guided outcomes without overt authority. People believed they acted independently, yet their actions reinforced broader stability. This indirect form of leadership minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and ensured long-term effectiveness. Networks became largely self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention. The results were visible in continuity and resilience. System operated predictably, disputes were contained, and networks adapted to change. Stability propagated naturally through subtle, consistent guidance. Gambino demonstrated that quiet, disciplined leadership produced results more enduring than force, intimidation, or public recognition. His influence was invisible yet profound, shaping outcomes in a way few could detect or resist. Emotional discipline was essential. Gambino maintained composure under pressure, separating personal feelings from professional decisions. Impulse, frustration, and anger had no role in strategic judgment. Calmness itself became a stabilizing factor, influencing networks as much through example as through direct intervention. Long-term perspective guided all action. Economic trends, demographic shifts, and social evolution introduced variables capable of destabilizing even well-functioning networks. By adhering to patience, consistency, discretion, and respect, Gambino preserved continuity while allowing systems to adapt. Flexibility complemented discipline, ensuring resilience without sacrificing stability. The paradox of quiet influence was clear. Its success often went unnoticed. When networks operated smoothly, observers assumed systems were self-sustaining. Only when disruption occurred did the absence of subtle guidance become evident. This invisibility was not a weakness, it was a mark of true effectiveness. Enduring influence is applied subtly, consistently, and indirectly, shaping outcomes more reliably than overt power. Relationships formed the foundation of authority. Gambino nurtured them carefully, understanding that loyalty and cooperation develop over time. Thoughtful interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to function independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became self-reinforcing, creating stability far beyond any single action or decision. Ultimately, this chapter demonstrates a timeless truth. Influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by spectacle, recognition, or domination, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex, dynamic environments. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most effective and lasting form of authority. In a city defined by relentless motion, ambition, and uncertainty, the rarest skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain stability under pressure. The principles demonstrated patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. The city never truly slept. Its streets, buildings, and avenues hummed with energy, ambition, and tension, forming a living organism in which every decision, every interaction, and every relationship carried consequences. Within this environment, visible authority often commanded attention, but it was subtle influence and strategic foresight that truly shaped outcomes. Thomas Gambino navigated this urban ecosystem with unmatched precision, acting as a quiet architect who guided outcomes without recognition. directing the currents of events while remaining largely invisible. His approach demonstrated that true power was not asserted through force or spectacle but cultivated through observation, insight, and patient intervention. Observation remained the foundation of his methodology. Human behavior was complex and often unpredictable. People acted not only out of reason, but also out of emotion, ego, desire, and fear. Gambino possessed an extraordinary ability to read these subtle cues, identify patterns, and anticipate the trajectory of actions before they could disrupt stability. Every gesture, conversation, and minor decision became an opportunity to influence outcomes indirectly. Through careful listening, patient assessment, and minimal, calculated intervention, he maintained equilibrium while preserving the autonomy of those around him. Trust formed the backbone of lasting influence. Gambino understood that trust could not be demanded but had to be earned consistently over time. Commitments were honored without exception, concerns were acknowledged, and sensitive information was protected meticulously. Small, deliberate actions, a private acknowledgement, a remembered detail, or a subtle suggestion reinforced reliability and strengthened relationships. Over time, trust created a network of predictable behavior, minimizing friction and enabling complex systems to function efficiently even under pressure. In a city prone to volatility, trust was more powerful than force, more stabilizing than intimidation. The city's intricate web of social, economic, and operational dynamics created constant pressure points. Business rivalries collided with labor disputes, neighborhood tensions overlapped with city regulations, and interpersonal conflicts emerged unpredictably. Gambino's strategy was to observe first, allowing underlying motivations and patterns to become clear before taking action. When intervention was necessary, it was precise, calculated, and minimally intrusive, restoring balance without escalating tensions. Stability was maintained not through domination but through foresight, understanding, and subtle influence. Patience was central to his approach. Immediate reactions might resolve a temporary problem but often produced unintended consequences. Gambino allowed situations to unfold just enough to reveal their full implications, ensuring that any action addressed the root of the issue rather than merely alleviating superficial symptoms. Timing became a critical tool, and interventions were deliberately designed to produce long-term effects with minimal disruption. In a city defined by constant motion and unpredictability, patience allowed for clarity and effectiveness. Negotiation and persuasion were executed through subtle framing. Gambino recognized that decisions were rarely based solely on logic. Pride, ambition, fear, and desire frequently guided behavior. By aligning individual objectives with broader stability, he minimized resistance and preserved dignity. Agreements endured because they were mutually advantageous, not because they were enforced. Influence operated indirectly yet effectively, shaping decisions and outcomes while maintaining the perception of autonomy. Operational and financial networks served as the structural foundation of influence. Contracts, business dealings, labor systems, and financial flows created multiple points of leverage. Gambino managed these meticulously, ensuring predictability and minimizing conflict. Disputes were contained. Operations continued without interruption, and networks functioned reliably. This invisible oversight demonstrated that subtle, consistent guidance could achieve results far more durable than displays of power or coercion. Delegation was essential to maintaining efficiency while minimizing exposure. Trusted intermediaries managed routine interactions, allowing Gambino to focus on strategic oversight. This structure created resilience. If one connection weakened, others absorbed the strain, preserving continuity. Authority was distributed thoughtfully, allowing systems to adapt to challenges without collapsing while remaining aligned with long-term objectives. Observation extended beyond operational matters to human behavior itself. Ambitions, loyalties, and priorities shifted constantly, influenced by circumstance and interpersonal dynamics. Gambino monitored these shifts and adjusted guidance discreetly to maintain alignment. Subtle interventions acknowledging effort, offering advice, or reminding individuals of mutual objectives sufficed to influence behavior. Without confrontation, networks became self-reinforcing, cohesive, and resilient under subtle guidance. Crisis management required foresight, assessment, and measured judgment. Unanticipated events, economic fluctuations, regulatory changes, or interpersonal conflicts demanded careful responses. Gambino evaluated scenarios meticulously, identified leverage points, and predicted responses with accuracy. Interventions were targeted and efficient, restoring balance without escalation. Emotional intelligence was essential. Addressing underlying motivations prevented repeated disruptions and reinforced cooperative behavior. Law enforcement scrutiny was a constant consideration. Surveillance, investigations, and informants created potential risk. Gambino mitigated exposure through discretion, delegation, and strategic distancing from sensitive operations. His invisibility was intentional, preserving influence while ensuring continuity. Safety and effectiveness were achieved through foresight, planning, and precise execution rather than reactive measures. Adaptability was vital in a city defined by change. New generations arrived with ambition, impatience, and unfamiliar methods. Some relied on aggression to assert influence, others sought recognition through disruption. Gambino allowed natural consequences to educate these individuals. Those who adapted integrated successfully. Those who failed gradually lost relevance. This approach preserved stability while enabling networks to evolve organically, maintaining resilience even amid volatility. Psychological insight was a central pillar of influence. By shaping perception and framing decisions subtly, Gambino guided outcomes without overt authority. People believed they acted independently, yet their actions reinforced broader stability. Indirect leadership minimized resistance, preserved relationships, and ensured long-term effectiveness. Networks became largely self-regulating, reducing the need for constant intervention and allowing stability to propagate naturally. The results were tangible in continuity and resilience. Systems operated predictably, disputes were contained, and networks demonstrated adaptability. Stability spread through consistent, subtle guidance. Gambino demonstrated that quiet, disciplined leadership produced outcomes far more enduring than force, intimidation, or public recognition. Influence, though invisible, had profound and lasting effects. Emotional discipline was critical. Gambino maintained composure under pressure, separating personal feelings from professional judgment. Impulse, frustration, and anger played no role in decision-making. Calmness became a stabilizing factor, influencing networks as much through example as through direct intervention. Long-term vision guided every decision. Economic shifts, demographic trends, and social evolution introduced variables capable of destabilizing even well-functioning networks. By adhering to principles of patience, consistency, discretion, and respect, Gambino preserved continuity while allowing systems to adapt. Flexibility complemented discipline, enabling resilience without compromising stability. The paradox of quiet influence was evident. Success was often invisible. When networks operated smoothly, people assumed systems were autonomous. Only during disruption did the absence of subtle guidance become apparent. This invisibility was not weakness. It was the hallmark of effective authority. Enduring influence is applied subtly, consistently, and indirectly, shaping outcomes far more reliably than overt power. Relationships formed the foundation of lasting authority. Gambino nurtured them carefully, recognizing that loyalty and cooperation develop over time. Thoughtful interventions reinforced alignment, allowing networks to function independently while remaining guided by subtle influence. Trust, once established, became self-reinforcing, creating stability far beyond any single act or decision. Ultimately, the conclusion is clear. Influence endures when exercised with subtlety, consistency, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Leadership is measured not by spectacle, recognition, or dominance, but by the durability of outcomes and the ability to maintain equilibrium in complex, dynamic environments. Influence that preserves autonomy, fosters cooperation, and ensures continuity is the most effective and lasting form of authority. This city's rhythm continues, driven by ambition, opportunity, and human complexity. The rarest and most valuable skill is the ability to act without drawing attention, to guide without commanding, and to maintain balance under pressure. The principles demonstrated patience, observation, discretion, and subtle guidance offer timeless lessons in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of quiet authority. Above all, they remind us that the greatest strength is not always seen, but it is always felt by those who rely on it.